The North, like any kingdom, had its own over-exaggerated images. The northern berserker, the fur-clad hunter, the wild tree worshipper. Yorick, the shepherd of Last Hearth, was these tall tales personified. If he wasn't truly sincere, he'd be accused of playing a mama's part. Tall, bearded and bald, with a thick layer of fat. A quick temper and dull demeanor. Yorick took his duties and responsibilities as seriously as any northern folk legend. Yorick caught Born in the yard, the morning after Lady Sansa's celebrations. "I see the great shepherd has finally corrected his predecessor's mistakes," was the senior shepherd's greeting. Taking care to ignore the man's tone, Born carefully replied. The signs were right and father decided the risk of the Starks going unguided was too great. A wise man, your father. Yorick's praise was genuine, though it wasn't without a barb. Though no one can choose their family. Born had his dagger out for a sharpening and polish. He paused, placing it to the side, then leaned back in his seat. The courtyard had a modest crowd, the early risers and household servants going about their early duties. He was waiting for John and Rob to break their fast. The two boys had badgered him into agreeing to lessons in the yard. He was decent enough with a blade or club, but his training in arms were a mix of familial teachings and survival experience. His distant cousins believed it would do him good to receive the attention of Sir Roderick. Of course. Though I'm unaware how a man from Last Hearth can know the mind of the great shepherd. I don't have to speak with the gods to know what sits before my eyes. Why you, of all people, were sent to Winterfell I may never understand. Born took a deep breath, hiding the grinding of his teeth. Yorick bent his bald skull in close. "You're a failure of a son." He snorted and spit on Born's feet. "A miserable coward who can't even carry on his father's legacy." Laughing loudly, Yorick turned away. "When you get homesick, boy, let me know before you scamper back to Skagos. I'll gladly take up your duties." Slumping, Born quickly put away his dagger and hurriedly left the yard. Focused on seeking solitude to cool his temper, Born overlooked the figure of Arya scampering out of the doorway he'd been sitting by, running in search of her father. // It took 5 minutes for Ned to get a straight story from Arya, then another 5 minutes convincing her not to dedicate the rest of her day to harassing this Yorick fellow. His daughter's last moments of attention were spent ensuring her father would seek out Born and make sure he was all right. True to his word, Ned postponed a meeting with Mayor Stillowin to seek out his distant cousin. His first stop was Born's favored spot in the Godswood. He found Moore instead, who languidly joined his search. Finding the Godswood empty, Ned stopped to think. While he decided that Wintertown was a likely choice, he unexpectedly pictured Born sitting on a bench near an old door. The image flashed in his mind. It was distorted slightly in color. Ned recognized it as the door to the crypts. Shaking away the image, he almost turned towards the stables. Something nudged his thoughts toward the crypts. He looked down to find Moore staring at him. The direwolf was quiet most of the time, occasionally growling while playing with the pups, but otherwise he was a silent predator. Ned brushed a hand across his companion's fur and set off towards the main keep. It would do no harm to ensure Born had left the castle before making the trek into town. Lord Stark. It was for naught. Born was indeed sitting outside of Winterfell's crypt. He stood and bowed when Ned approached. "How are you, Born? Not too tired from the celebration, I hope." "I'm fine, Lord Stark. I spent most of the evening enjoying the food rather than the ale." "Good." Ned smiled. Born didn't sound any worse for wear, but there was fatigue in his posture. The sound of a scratch drew his eyes to the door to the crypts. Moore was patiently scratching at the bottom of the heavy ironwood door. "You haven't been to the crypts yet, have you?" The shepherd blinked. "No, my lord." Lord Robb pointed them out in passing. He looked away for a moment. "I didn't want to presume too much, Lord Stark. You have Stark blood, and as much right as I do to see the resting place of our family." Ned walked past, opening the door. Moore slipped in immediately and Born entered behind him. Ned picked up a lantern from the wall and lit it. Guiding Born down the stairs, the long halls cast deep shadows across their steps. More stayed just in sight of the lamplight as they traveled down. It didn't take long to come upon the most recent additions. When Rukun was born, Ned had commissioned the masons to add a new set of unsealed tombs. There were now places ready for himself, Benjen and all his children, while Caitlin would rest beside him. The largest would one day bear a statue in his likeness. Next came the towering resting place of his father. Ricard Stark's face looked out stoically like in Ned's memory. Beside him was Brandon and Lionel. Traditionally, their graves would have been simple boxes with nothing more than a name inscribed. None of his household argued when Ned had instead commissioned statues for them. It wasn't unheard of. Most seemed to think it was a way to honor their part in overthrowing the Targaryens. Ned's true purpose had been to keep their likeness alive outside his memory. "You resemble your father, my lord," Bourne commented. Ned shook his head. "As a child, I had more of the flint look from my grandmother. I suppose I've grown into my own. Arya is the spitting image of my sister." He tried not to linger on the grief Lionel's face kindled. Pushing past, he led Bourne farther into the stonework. The next set of statues were older but preserved by the cold and careful maintenance. Ned named them as they came. "This is my grandfather, Edwyle." Beside him are the statues of his father Willam, his uncle Donna, and his uncle Artos. Ned pointed to the simple graves set behind the statues. Birena Stark was supposedly buried here with her brothers and sister. I guess the tomb was left empty. As the eldest daughter, Birena wouldn't have been allowed to wed a shepherd. Bourne had 2 healthy sons though, so he was convinced to make an exception. Bourne added. They had to descend another level to reach the tombs Ned had in mind for this visit. He paused momentarily to examine the livery carved into the arches above him. "Are those runes?" Peering up, Bourne nodded. If Edwyle and Artos were in charge of preparing the upper level, they no doubt wished to distance themselves from the older traditions. There was a definitive chill in the air now. Strangely enough, Moore seemed more at home. The wolf jogged forward, taking a seat and staring up at the next statue. It was quite worn by age, the traditional iron sword laid across the lap. This was also the first statue to have a stone direwolf at its side. "Byrne Stark," Bourne declared. He stood close to the statue, examining the door face. If one spent enough time in the crypts, as Ned had, it was possible to see the small touches that personalized the statues. How they were dressed and the sigils hewn into their minimal detailing all held significance. Byrne Stark was mortally wounded while defeating the Ironborn. He was depicted in a mailcoat and under his right foot was a dead squid. Byrne's mother was a proud Karstark and upon the memorial's right hand was a simple disc ring with an inlaid sun. Not all lords had that level of detail put into their tombs. It largely depended on the amount of time, attention and coin committed by the living members of the family, all of which was further limited by the skill of the sculptor. Bourne hummed and took a step back. He was frowning. "Not what you expected?" Ned asked. "For some reason I pictured finding a statue that mirrored my father. In my mind he's always embodied the likeness of the Starks, but I know better now." The young man tugged at his own hair. "My own hair is more black than brown, and my father's eyes are closer to brown than grey. Lord Umber has blood among the shepherds. You spoke once of a friend, Harmon. Harrod." "Yes, his grandfather was an Umber cousin. I won't deny that I very much would like to meet your father, Bourne. To know that I have close kin still in the north is a great relief. Outside of your line, our next closest cousins come through Edwyle's sister, who wed into a junior Royce line down in the Vale. I thought that Arto's line continued with 2 sons. His grandson through his eldest took the black. His granddaughter, by the younger brother, married a second son of the Glovers. Her descendant, Ethan Glover, was my squire during the rebellion for that reason. He died in the rebellion." Bourne wandered to another statue, obviously trying to distract himself. "I heard that some words were exchanged between you and an Umber shepherd." Ned saw the Bourne bite hard on his lip, the dim lighting unable to completely hide his embarrassed flush. "You've done an admirable job here. I'm thankful you arrived. Why would this Yorick claim you were a failure?" "Because I am," Bourne confessed. "The great shepherd must always be a greenseer. It's the one official qualification. When I was younger, everyone expected me to be a prodigy like my father. I was more of a disappointment, I just didn't have the gift. Ned looked confused. I have very weak visions, the occasional dream, and as a child I couldn't even skin change. Bourne explained. Moore slipped beside Bourne and nestled into his shoulder. I found the lessons difficult. When I got too frustrated, I would run off on my own. I'd spend days camping out on Skagos until my guilt brought me back. My home became a place to escape rather than live. When my sister was born, I saw a way out. You have a sister? Bourne grimaced while nodding. Marie. She's the prodigy, everything I couldn't live up to. She was flying through birds by the time she was 7, and speaking with the werewolves at 12. He chuckled. She drank up the lessons like a bottomless well. With a proper heir for my father, I decided that it was time to stop deluding myself. I wasn't going to be a shepherd. Then how did you come to be here? Something must have changed. Reaching into his cloak, Bourne ran his hand along his necklace of teeth. I couldn't work up the courage to face my father or my teachers. I left with another shepherd heading north of the wall. It was short notice and I wasn't prepared. We'd landed near Hardham when I realized I'd likely wouldn't survive on my own. I pretended to be a full shepherd and tricked a small tribe into taking me in. We were traveling through the haunted forest when a war party from further up the river ambushed us. You fought them off? Ned guessed. Bourne ground his jaw. No. The tribe was slaughtered, but the enemy recognized my garb and decided that it would be bad luck to kill me. Didn't stop them from leaving me stranded. Alone, beyond the wall with no food. How did you survive? I wasn't planning to. See, the tribe had asked me to seek guidance on the best way to reach their old hunting grounds. I advised them to go through the forest. If I had been a real shepherd, I would have consulted the routes, maybe watched into a bird to scout the way. Instead, those people put their faith in a liar. I burned their bodies, found a godswood and prayed for their souls. I was starving and freezing. I fell asleep against a heart tree, confident I wouldn't wake. Bourne looked up and his eyes shone with wonder. Instead, I dreamed for the first time. I stood before a mighty castle of old stone. It was empty, nothing but the whispers of ghosts filled the halls. Behind me I heard the roar of a great beast as it ripped the throat from its prey. I was terrified. My hands were made of gnarled wood and I knocked upon the gate in fear. The castle moved, and I realized it was no keep but a great wolf carved from stone. Ned could hear a steady drumbeat but realized it was his own heart. I woke up and Green Eyes was laid beside me. Her stomach was just beginning to swell. I felt the touch of the gods that night and returned to Skagos with all haste. By the grace of the old gods, I ran into a party returning east and tagged along. I finished my training and apologized to my father. Yet, Yurik mocks you. Though I regained my honor when I returned and even some acclaim for finding a pregnant direwolf. The fact remains that my green sight is sparing and weak, the best skin changing I can manage is to impart a command, but I will never share a mind with a beast, never bond. Ned could hear the longing, the wistfulness in Bourne's words. He spoke of a privilege, a wonder, he'd never have. Marie will find a good match on Skagos. All the major clans will want her. There's a good chance she'll be the great shepherd one day. A woman can attain the title. Ned was shocked. Bourne nodded. It doesn't happen often. The last was a younger daughter of the Reeds, Neelit Earthheart, some 200 years ago. Bourne smiled. If any woman can do it, it'll be my sister. She's always exceeded where I've failed. If greatness is her future, what about you? Me? Bourne asked. I'll have to find my match outside the island. Hopefully a woman who won't mind being married to the lesser child of the wolf tongue. Ned passed Bourne his wineskin, the younger man took it gratefully, his mouth parched from the cold and confession. If you are the lesser son, then would your sister have not made a better choice to send to Winterfell? It was seriously considered. Except, there was uncertainty to how a woman would be received by your family. Especially, an unmarried woman. While I was away fetching Green Eyes, it was decided I would make the first overtures. The two men began making their way back to the surface. I don't think any less of you, Bourne. There's no need to be courteous, Lord Stark. I understand what my actions mean. I'm trying to do better now, but sometimes it's hard to not feel like a fool, trying so hard to be something I'm not. Those words struck Ned's heart. He paused. When I received the news about my father's death, it felt like my soul had been struck. In truth, it was Brandon's death that nearly swallowed me whole. Not just because he was my brother, but because it meant I was Lord of Winterfell. To suddenly have that responsibility thrust down, to have no choice but to step into a role I wasn't meant to, nor prepared to take, was maddening. Even after the rebellion I felt like I was wearing a mask. Those early days were hard. I was unsure, alone, and every decision I made only seemed to create more problems. Ned smiled at Bourne. I felt like a fool, trying so hard to be something I wasn't. Ned led them out of the crypts. Their confessions to be kept by the statues of their forefathers. Bourne stood straight and bade Lord Stark goodbye, intent on joining Jon and Robb in the yard. // Winterfell was full of people, bustling from room to room. There was conversation in every hall, footsteps in every stair, and the chambers were full to bursting. Catelyn had a full smile on her face. She'd started the day refreshed from a night of pleasantries and perhaps a touch too much wine. Her maids were on time and doing an admirable job. Kat took the time to order a platter of apples and bread to be brought up to her rooms. She was hosting multiple ladies of the North for the first time since she arrived after the rebellion. Looking back, the true shock of the North had not been the weather, it had been the politics. Oh, there were similarities. Kingdoms, from the Wall to Dawn, ran the same way. Lords, taxes, small folk, food, these were things Catelyn had learned about by her father's side at Riverrun. She'd been preparing to step into her role as a lady for years. Her expectations had been realistic by all measures. Her days would be spent entertaining and negotiating with the ladies and children staying in the keep while the lords handled business. She would have managed the funds of their household and ensured they were adequately funded, and in the absence of her husband she would have taken charge to ensure matters remained stable. Finally, she would have had a small group of senior household servants that reported to her for instruction. When she had children, they would be taught by a maester until they reached an age to separate them. From then on, her sons would be taken in hand by their father while a scepter would handle the supervision of her daughters alongside Catelyn herself. Her sons would be knights and her daughters, ladies. Catelyn was prepared for her new life. Then she arrived at Winterfell. By the grace of the Seven, Catelyn was a young woman in a foreign land with a stranger for a husband and a newborn babe. All of that added to the unexpected challenges that being Lady Stark entailed. Winterfell was not ordered like Riverrun, nor like any Lord Paramount seat that she knew of. First of all, there was no court. That had left her confused for a full week. She'd been in a rush to prepare Winterfell for what was sure to be a huge party of visitors. After the war, she'd thought the various lords would be arriving and staying for weeks in order to properly adjust to Ned's new rule. She hadn't accounted for the delay that her husband's journey to Dawn caused. When he finally arrived at Riverrun, only the Stark and Reed men remained south of the Neck. It took 2 months before Lord Umber arrived. He was happy to see Ned, but he hadn't brought his wife or children. Catelyn was disappointed, but she understood that Lord Umber had lost more men than most at the Trident and he had to put his lands to rights. The Great Jon, as he insisted she call him, was succinct and straightforward. His negotiations with Ned took 2 days, they hunted for another, then Lord Umber had to leave. Apparently he was making stops at every major keep in the east. Then he predicted he'd be stuck in Last Hearth for another 5 or 6 years or until the next harvest feast. Once again, Winterfell laid empty. This process repeated for the next year as Robb grew older. Lords and their guards came on their own as they made visits and Ned oversaw what business they each had. No doubt Ned did his fair share of hard negotiation. There was tension with the Dustins and Ryswells over the death of their kin who escorted Ned into Dawn. In return for their service, Ned granted them increased hunting rights and made a deal to purchase 50 strong steeds from their stables over the next 5 years. With the Rylls and Barrowlands mollified, he had to turn his attention to the mountain clans. The Flints, kin to Ned's grandmother, sent word after Rob's second name a day of trouble brewing. As far as she understood it, Lord Flint had arranged a betrothal for his niece to a son of House Notts in exchange for 6 moons' worth of meat and salt. The Nott son perished at the Trident, but upon returning home, the Flints discovered their girl had fallen pregnant before they marched to war. The Notts refused to pay the agreed-upon price because in their eyes the betrothal had been broken. Fights between the two houses had already broken out. Ned was being called to ride and settle the matter. The betrothal was one of the strangest things she'd ever heard. She pleaded with Ned to simply let someone else deal with the matter. Her father would never have deigned to intercede so personally in the feuds of lesser lords. Ned explained that the hill clans were a different folk but loyal nonetheless. If he didn't bring justice to the matter, it could spark a feud between the two houses. According to Mayor Stillowin, the last conflict in the mountains had taken months of bloodshed to quell. Ned was gone for nearly a full moon, with only one raven relaying his arrival at the Flints' home. Then silence. Another message arrived late. Her heart froze when she learned that Ned had been injured. A brawl had broken out during a meeting between the two families. 3 men had been injured and 1 killed. Ned had been accidentally struck in the back, aggravating a wound he'd taken at the Battle of the Bells. Her husband had recovered and then taken the heads of 2 murderers before arranging for half the betrothal price to be paid as agreed. The clansman seemed satisfied and sent a stack of pelts back to Winterfell in gratitude. Her fear when word of his injury brought about another shock, the depth of her feelings for her husband. The September he commissioned, Rob, even the responsibility and respect he gave her had grown a love deep in her spirit. Catelyn was quite certain Sansa was conceived upon his safe return. Lady Stark. Catelyn turned to the older servant who had called out to her. Berta was in charge of the pantry and always kept a close watch on the food stores. It seemed a few too many wheels of cheese had been brought up for the celebration. As they walked, Catelyn gave instruction for a portion of the potatoes to be traded to make up for it. Dealing with the pantry. At Riverrun, the most interaction she had with the kitchens and maids had been through the steward. Vanepool was as competent a man as any, and he dealt with the larger part of Winterfell's servants and assisted her in many duties. Tradition dictated, though, that the kitchen and the maids were to be handled directly by Lady Stark. Old Nan had told her it was because the Starks took hospitality very seriously, and nothing less than the watchful eye of the Lady of Winterfell would suffice. It was comforting in a way, to have such a direct hand in her household. Though if there was a court, she doubted the tradition would last long. Lady Stark. Another interruption in the form of Septa Mordain and Septon Chael. Is it not time for the girls' lessons, Septa? She wondered. Mordain sniffed disdainfully. Today's lessons would normally have been centered around the 7-point star. That explained her attitude. Ned had convinced her that with Sansa nearly a woman grown and Arya's fights with her teacher growing worse by the year, it couldn't hurt for their lessons to be reduced. Instead, both her daughters could spend the occasional day learning at her side. It seemed fitting. Catelyn had been running Riverrun by the time she was 13. The decision led to an enjoyable change and she'd had the chance to start easing the tension between Sansa and Arya, a tension that had spiraled out of control under the watch of the Septa in front of her. Mordain continued, Septon Chael and I wished to petition you. She nudged Chael forward. He was a timid but polite enough man. You see, Lady Stark, the Septa and I are concerned. Aside from yourself and a few servants from the keep, attendance to my sermons have been ebbing over the last few moons. None of the converts from Wintertown have attended. Mordain added. None. Catelyn was surprised. She'd thought Winterfell's September had a small but dedicated congregation. The Septa was agitated. I went down to ask after them a few days ago. Not 10 minutes into my visit I caught a group of older dames, who I thought were the most eager worshippers, coming from some place in the woods. Oh, she was turning truly pink now. They were happy to see me. They asked if I was going to visit the Godswood. Me, pray before a heathen tree. Did you question them? Cat was not happy with Mordain's tone. Chael laid a calming hand on Mordane's shoulder as she took deep breaths. No one would come right out and say it. Chael was frustrated, but not furious as Mordane was. Though I suspect it has something to do with the arrival of the direwolves, he explained. That savage has corrupted the people, I know it. I see him out and about, going from house to house. The boy thinks himself a maester. Her Septa couldn't contain herself today, it seemed. Caitlin discreetly checked the hallway for any of the servants and noticed a slip of a dress poking from one end. Someone was listening. She had to be very careful about this. Her response wouldn't not be kept private. Septon Chael, Septa Mordane. While I truly appreciate your dedication, you must not forget that this is the North. The roots of the godswoods run deep in these lands. It certainly brought me joy that some of the small folk found peace with the Seven, but there's no way we can force them to be devout. Her answer didn't satisfy the pair. Lady Stark, I must insist that boy and those beasts be sent away. We were finally making progress. I know that if we truly pushed for it we could expand Chael's congregation. There will be no talk of conversion in my house, Septa Mordane. Caitlin's fierce rebuke caught both worshippers off guard. This is the North, and perhaps it's time you two realized that. My husband's people do not believe that the gods rest inside a temple. The gods are in the wind that blow their mills, the rivers that hold the fish, the trees that feed their fires. Lady Caitlin, surely you have not lost faith. Chael was certainly shaken. Of course not, Septon. I pray every morning and give thanks every night. That will not change. You two must come to terms with the realities of life north of the neck. We live in a land where the snows can bury whole villages. When faced with that, would it not seem folly that a man dressed in silk is the only way the gods can speak? Mordane was purpling and Chael was frowning, looking down at his well-kept coat, a gift from the most devout when he came north. I am content with my small worship. We have no need to worry about the politics or the decadence so easily found in the south. Caitlin continued. In the past few moons I have begun to see the work of the Seven around us. Born's lessons, the few she had accompanied her children to, had been interesting. He taught of the many facets of northern history that none but a maester would seek out. Her children were learning how the small folk farmed, how the various villages around Winterfell came to be, how they cooperated, and how they quarreled. They were also taught the wildly different traditions of the old gods, the way worship and tales changed from one castle to another. The openness of her children permitted her to learn about her husband's faith in a way no servant or vassal had ever expressed. They knew she was of the Seven, and had long ago decided not to risk insulting her in some way. The Seven are not here, Lady Stark. Mordane insisted. This place has never received their touch. That is why we must hearken to the Great September and the High Septon. We have a duty to them. Caitlin shook her head. In truth she disagreed. I see the crone's touch when the elder servants give advice to their young charges. I see the maid when a wedding is joined in Wintertown. I see the smith when wind and snow are pushed back so homes can be rebuilt. I see the warrior when the guards return home safe and whole. I see the mother when the laughs of my children echo in the halls. And I see the father when my husband brings justice and peace to his lands. She looked Mordane in the eyes. Then, I see all that without having a grand September, or boxes of jewels sent south. Mordane couldn't seem to accept Caitlin's words. She curtsied and marched off, dissatisfied. Chael was lost in thought but bid her goodbye and said he'd be in the library. He muttered something about history having an answer. Alone again, Caitlin takes a deep breath. She turned the corner and opened the door to her rooms where her guests awaited. Swallowing her fear, she smiled and walked in. Chapter 11, Pillars of the Past. Summary. /n, thanks to all the commenters and reviewers. I know it's been a long while but I appreciate everyone who came back to the story. The Stark children are still quite young, Arya, Bran and Rickon especially, and I don't know how to write children. I've tried to keep them somewhat immature but I don't think I've succeeded. I hope you enjoy this chapter and some more history that doesn't technically conflict with canon. I'm more so making up my own history to fill in the ambiguous spots in Assoy of canon. Theon is kind of a hard situation for me to tackle. This fic is shaping up to be a bit more on the happy rather than angst side. While I think he's an interesting character in the books, I'm reluctant to let him become the same villain as before. So I'm searching for some not too OOC ways of changing his story. As always, comments and feedback are appreciated. Chapter text. Rukun. Watch your feet. You know mother will be upset if you get dirty. Sangza's shouting had little effect as Rukun, with his unnamed direwolf pup, sprinted out of earshot. She took a moment to collect her wax tablet and parchment before following him out of the godswood. Tucking her writing supplies into a satchel, she took a moment to admire the leather stitching. It was a gift from her friend Jane Poole for her name day. It was a simple bag made special by the trim of roses stitched in white. Of all her presents, the bag had seen the most use. She hardly went anywhere without it. Sangza. Speaking of which, Jane was walking through the yard as Sangza emerged from the godswood and called out to her. Where have you been? Jane asked. Sangza pointed to Rukun, who was now trying very hard to climb Rob's legs, while the pups tussled around the yard. She even noticed Lady and Birina nipping at each other. Sangza's first instinct had been to keep Lady close and clean, but with Green Eyes taking charge, all the little wolves were soon prowling and learning to hunt. Rukun wanted to visit the godswood and I was finishing up a poem. Sangza explained. Jane leaned against one of the inner walls, her smile dimmed. Is it one of those weird poems that the shepherd asked you to write? Not at all. Sangza denied. This is a special verse that I'm writing for Rob's name day. Can I see it? Jane leaned forward. Sangza slipped the parchment to her friend while she watched John lift Rukun onto Rob's shoulders. The trio all laughed at something Rukun said. You wrote this in that weird language. Jane complained. You know I can't read it. Sangza apologized and tucked her work away. I'm sorry, Jane, but the rhymes don't work in the common tongue. The common tongue was good enough before. Jane muttered, walking toward the keep. Jane, wait. Sangza hurried to catch her friend. Following into the main hall, she saw Jane make her way to her rooms and Sangza could hear tiny sobs the whole way. Sangza pulled Jane to a stop outside the pool quarters. What is wrong? Oh, nothing. Just you and your siblings are all busy doing secret Stark stuff. It's important stuff, Jane. Says who? Says my father. Jane shrunk back at that statement. Either way, what is Lord Stark thinking? Letting you learn from that savage. Septa Mordain says that he's done no good and should be sent away from Winterfell. There were still tears in her eyes as she rallied. Septa Mordain is not lord here. She has no say in what my family decides is important. Hesitating, Jane shifted topics. Well, what about marriage? No southern lord is going to want to marry you when he finds out you're being taught by some stranger in green robes and praying in the godswood. You barely go to the September anymore, Sangza. Jane accused. It was true, with the extra lessons from Bourne and time spent with the direwolves, Sangza had found herself only going to the September for weekly service with her mother. Where she used to find contentment and enthusiasm when listening to the prayers of the seven, now she felt somewhat hollow. The words were still pretty and the sentiments behind them were nice, but there was just something special about sitting in the leaves, braced against the heartree, praying in quiet, that a Septon's sermon fell short of. Guiltily, Sangza also noticed that she had more spare stags since she wasn't giving it up to collection. Sangza hadn't brought it up with her mother, but she knew Bran and Arya had already stopped going altogether. Septon Chael was nice enough, if a bit awkward at times. It was Septa Mordain that was starting to get on her nerves. Even with less lessons, the older woman had seen fit to crown what time they did spend together with lots of advice. An awful lot of that boiled down to, Bourne is an evil savage, father is being tricked, remember that you're going to marry a great southern lord, and Arya is a lost cause. It was all getting very tiresome. What was worse was that she'd found the Septa passed out in the sewing room more than once, with an empty bottle at her side. If this kept up, she was going to ask mother about setting Mordain straight. I don't want to fight. Sangza implored. Do you even still want to be my friend? Jane cried. Oh, Jane. Sangza rushed forward and enveloped her friend in a tight embrace. Resting their heads together, Sangza waited until Jenny had stopped sobbing, wiping away a few of her tears in the process. This wasn't part of our plan, Sangza. What do you mean? You were supposed to be the perfect lady. Then when you were betrothed we'd both go south. I'd stay by your side when you ruled and find myself a brave, gallant knight to fall in love with. Now, the servants are saying that Lord Stark is going to arrange for a northern marriage. Jane told her. I know. Sangza told her. You know. Sangza nodded. Father told me before my name day. And you're going to go along with it? Janine was shocked. Yes, but I wouldn't leave you behind, Jane. Sangza added. You can come with me wherever I go and I'll make sure you have a good husband. Besides, why can't we be happy here, in the north? Jane blinked and sniffled. You'd still take me with you. Really? But I'm just a steward's daughter. Your father's not just a steward. The pools have served the Starks for generations. Even longer than the castles. I'm surprised your father hasn't told you about it. Father is usually busy, he trusts that Lady Stark will ensure I'm taught what I need. Sangza rolls her eyes. Well, I'm sure your ancestors would want you to know your own family history. You should ask him tonight. Jane hesitated, then noticed some servants moving through the great hall. You must have duties to attend to. I'm sorry for dragging you away. Mother asked that I spend time with some of the bannerman's daughters. Would you come with me? Jane's eyes widened. Would that be proper? A good question. Sangza didn't have much experience with other noble ladies. She had been much younger when the lords had gathered to celebrate Rukun's first name day, and from what she could recall, they had spent most of the time throwing snow around in the yard. She and Jane were nearly adults now. Swallowing her fear, Sangza locked arms with Jane and passed her a handkerchief to dry her eyes. I'm the eldest daughter of the Warden of the North. Sangza straightened her back and frowned in a way she hoped replicated her father's cool composure. I've decided it is proper. Together the pair climbed the first keep stairways to the upper levels. The sewing room door was open, projecting mutterings or the occasional laugh from within. Sangza made eye contact with Jane, then strode in. It was the most crowded Winterfell sewing circle had ever been. Sitting beside the fireplace was Lady Umber and Lady Karstark conversing with Lady Tallheart. A cluster of the married women from houses Sewin, Condon and Qua were sharing some food by the tables. Standing over the chest of needles and thread were yet more guests, including Umber Umber. The only open chairs were by Alis Karstark and Eddara Tallheart. When Sangza was finally noticed, everyone stood and greeted her. Sangza did her best to return the greetings and join in with the group. Lady Karstark made polite enough inquiries about her siblings, though there was a strange focus on Robb. Ladies Umber and Tallheart complimented her dress, then praised her mother for the celebration feast and her hospitality. Leaving the older women to their conversation, Sangza took her sewing supplies and joined Jane with the girls closer to her age. Good afternoon, Lady Alis, Lady Eddara. Do you mind if we join you? Sangza asked. Please do. We were just about to ask Lady Jane about life here at Winterfell. Alis replied. The only daughter of Carhold was of an age with Jon. She was tall and skinny, her brown hair was woven into a simple braid that Sangza had noticed many of their visitors preferred. Eddara nodded along. I could hardly believe my eyes when I saw the grounds. The castle is massive, truly a sight to behold. It must be a monumental task to keep the household in working order. The second child of Lord Tallheart was a comely girl with ruddy blonde hair styled into 2 short braids. We didn't notice any of your mother's ladies in waiting. Are they somewhere else? Alis asked. Sangza frowned. Mother arrived from Riverrun with 3 ladies. Sadly, I never met them. One caught a fever and passed on, the other married a knight from the Stormlands, and her final lady had to return to the Riverland when I was but a babe. Mother never sent for replacements. Jane spoke up then, trying to lighten the mood. I'm not really sure how the household is managed. Sangza and I spend most of our time in lessons with Septa Mordain. Alis and Eddara seemed surprised. We heard there was a September here, Alis commented. I never expected you to have a Septa. What's that like? Sangza explained some of the basic lessons Septa Mordain had taught her, Jane and Arya. Her new acquaintances understood most of it, even commenting that they learned similar things, to a point. I guess there's not much of a difference between your septa and our matrons. Edara pointed out. Matrons? Sangza asked. Edara nodded. Most of the houses in the north have matrons. It's similar to your septa. Someone to educate you and teach you valuable skills. They are usually either a family member or a member of a friendly house. My matron is Lady Tanner, she's kin to my mother. Do you have a matron, Alice? Alice nodded. She was one of my cousin's matrons but came to live at Carhold when I was 5. She's very shrewd about some things, but she runs a large dye house in Hilltop and I've learned quite a lot. Her husband must be quite wealthy to own such a property. Jane said while sorting through her sewing supplies. Her husband doesn't own it, Lord Bardern does. Sangza fumbled with her cloth bolt. Is Ara's husband one of Bardern's vassals then? No, Ara runs the dye house, Lord Bardern owns the building. Alice stated. It seemed so strange to Sangza, Jane looked similarly gobsmacked. Their guests took in their visibly confused hosts. Ara's father is a merchant who does quite a lot of trading with Lord Bardern. If I remember correctly, Ara took over the dye house from Lord Bardern's good sister many years ago. Alice explained. I've never heard of a lady doing something like that. What does Lord Karstark think of it? Jane probed. Alice turned her head and called out. Mother. What does father think of Ara? Lady Karstark turned to them. Ara Cogston. He thinks well enough of her. I believe he would prefer she'd go a little easier on her prices but I doubt that can be helped. Alice turned back. Nothing untoward. Ara's been dyeing clothes for Carhold for decades. I believe she even colored my aunt's bridal gown. Ladies aren't supposed to be merchants. Jane asserted. Alice looked to Edara for some kind of help. Sangza suspected she was missing something. Ladies of Sangza or Alice station wouldn't, of course. Edara hesitated before moving on. Women of lower status often have to. It's quite common, Lady Jane. I believe that Wintertown's linen house is run by a woman, Alice informed them. I know for a fact that Hilltop's bakery is run by a mother and her 3 daughters. I don't understand. Jane appeared rather lost, her stitchings untouched in her lap. Jane, if I may call you that. Edara gently stated. Your family and mine are not often in the position that we can sustain our houses solely on taxes alone. We must find other sources of funds. Whereas the greater houses can finance merchants or own buildings, our wealth is made through work. Especially once we reach marrying age, it'll be harder to find a match if we don't have some existing skills. The stories and songs never mentioned that. Jane told Sangza. I imagined the stories were about princesses and queens. Edara pointed out. The idea is nothing new. In fact, my family began from one such woman. Truly. Sangza asked for her benefit as much as Jane's. I must admit I've only just begun being taught about Father's Bannerman. Would you care to enlighten us, Lady Edara? Certainly, Lady Sangza. Edara reached over and refreshed herself with a drink. The Tall Hearts are masters of Torrens Square, but we did not build it. Thousands of years ago my ancestors were simply small folk sworn to the Warg Kings of Sea Dragon Point. They were loyal but unhappy. My ancestors made their living off their deer herds. The Warg King gave his skin changers the right to take any animal they could control as their own property. Does that mean they fought against the Kings of Winter? Sangza asked. More than a few times, I believe. At least until the final war. Edara confirmed. King Jerick Stark was the one to finally conquer Sea Dragon Point. It was on his final march that he encountered my family. The Stark army had marched through the southern Wolfswood and stopped to make camp. That night they discovered hundreds and hundreds of rats had eaten through their supplies and spoiled the rest. The Warg King had sent the vermin to starve out his enemies before they could face him in battle. Jane gasped in shock. King Jerick's only choice was to either march back to Winterfell or scour the nearby villages for supplies. His men were saved when a group of herders arrived at their camp. The leader introduced herself and asked the king if he had come for the Warg King's crown of claws. Edara paused here. Sangza laughed. Don't leave us in suspense. What did the king answer? He said, no, I have come for the Warg King's head, his crown shall be left to the crows. Then my ancestor and her children bent the knee. They brought King Jerick to their deer and allowed him to slaughter half the herd. After the war, she was summoned to Winterfell and again knelt before the king. For her charity her family was granted that same piece of the southern wolfswood and even lumber rights to the sentinel trees within its borders. She and her children took the name Tall Heart and the sentinel trees as their sigil. Jane clasped hands with Eddara. That's amazing, Eddara. Thank you. Does that mean Torrens Square wasn't yours originally? Sansa wondered. You're correct, though we were given the lands by the Starks we were in fact sworn to House Ryder, the former kings of the Rylls. Eddara explained. When the Rylls rebelled, a prince of Winterfell rode against them. Torrhen Tallheart was lord at the time and he led a rout against what was once the keep of Red Stables on Bridal Lake. After the war, Red Stables was renamed to Torrens Square and the Tallhearts were made its masters. Do you still have your herds? Jane asked. Indeed we do, as we are only a masterly house we have to sustain ourselves somehow. My mother Eddara gestured to Lady Tallheart, who had a fine deerskin cloak draped over her chair. Is in charge of the hearts. They are essential to our house's prosperity. We do a lot of leatherworking and sell it to merchants from the Westerlands and Riverlands. And Lady Tallheart oversees it all. Jane clarified. From breeding, to feeding, to butchering and tanning. Mother ensures that the skins are delivered to our port. Eddara confirmed. Working the skins is one reason I love leatherworking so much. Jane is excellent at it as well. Sansa told her. Jane blushed, leather's not like lace though, it can't be used for proper dresses. Ignoring her, Sansa passed over her satchel to the other girls. Then sat back as Jane was complicated on her work and enjoyed their shock when her friend revealed she'd made the whole thing from scratch in less than 3 days. A hand gently landed on Sansa's shoulder, looking up she smiled at her mother and made room for her to join. All in all it was one of her favorite days she could remember. I wonder if father would let Eddara and Alis stay for longer. Sansa thought. I wonder if they could bring their matrons. // Rob blinked down at the trail of ink that trailed off halfway through his word. He was learning very quickly that writing reams and reams of text was not easy on the hand or the mind. He had no idea how Maestlawin did it. Leaning back, Rob cracked his neck while taking in Winterfell's library. He'd spent dozens of hours in here, sometimes with father and sometimes alone. None of his family would label him a reader, yet he pushed past his own boredom to study the Stark histories. One condition of being given access to the books was that he had to make a sincere effort to learn the old tongue. A necessity if you sought to browse anything written before 1000 BC. If you wished to read the older texts you had to contribute to making a new copy. Rob and John had made it somewhat of a contest on who could learn the fastest, and he was intent on winning. For his first copy, Rob had selected the writings of Theon the Hungry Wolf while John passed through the records of Brandon the Shipwright. Father had been surprised at his choice and mother somewhat unhappy. Regardless, Rob had to face the truth, he was half Andal. Despite the first man origins of House Tully, his mother's line had left their pasts behind when the Seven came to the Riverlands. Theon Stark was one of the reasons the Andal warlords never conquered the north. That was a man who interested Rob, a king who saved his kingdom and was forever remembered. Reaching over, Rob slid the ancient book into his lap, though it was not as ancient as they first assumed. A careful examination of the runes inscribed on the cover revealed that it was a copy made a decade before the conquest. Maestlawin suspected it was a regular practice at one time. Another practice that Rob was helping to revive. Carefully flipping to his marked page Rob recalled where he'd left off. Right, Theon had just received another report about the Andals clashing with the petty Riverland kings. He was particularly worried about the rumors that the Gardener kings had welcomed the invaders to his court. The Hungry Wolf did not write often and he had the annoying habit of not providing exact dates. Rob flipped through lazily, but sat up straight when he saw a crude drawing of the Bolton sigil at the header of the next section. forward slash 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 forward slash. This is a day to remember. A messenger arrived at court, whose coat bore the flayed man. I stayed my blade long enough to learn he bore a message from the hand of the Red King, that Ruger, asking for my aid. How I laughed, even my friend Barris could not withhold his humor. A rare sight from the mountain bear. Word has reached Bolton from the Flints that a fleet of these Andals has sailed through the Bight and made camp at the mouth of Weeping Water. The huntsman fears they mean to take the dread fort. While my gut tells me to leave the flayed men to their graves, I cannot deny that I yearn to test the mettle of these foreigners. Refugees from the Riverlands tell of some warriors called NYGHTS that break the flanks of men like water upon the sand. I'd like to see them break a line of Stark riders. They would find our long spears and thick shields not so easy a foe. I will admit, I fear their closeness to Skagos if the dread fort did fall. I have sent word to the great Shepherd, though I doubt they have not already heard. Regardless, I have ordered a muster and bid messengers ride hard for Last Hearth. I shall return to Winterfell with blood on my axe and perhaps more. I sit now in my solar. My leg cramps horribly. The cut in my knee itches despite Dicer's careful bandaging. These swords, Iron the Andals called it, are incredible. It almost made me believe they were gifts from their strange gods. Though the prisoners say it is widely used across Essos. Their secrets shall be ours soon enough. The Val and his scouts captured some craftsmen when we assaulted the Andal camps. As I've written before, the Weeping Water was truly a great battle. Now that the bodies have been burned and the maneuvers of the field accounted, I find it prudent to write on the greater achievement. The crown of the Red Kings now sits upon my hearth. Ruger's stubborn pride was easily my greatest asset. As expected, the Boltons would take nothing less than the vanguard and were determined to bloody the Andals. The Umbers say that Ruger wrote to me after weeks of debate. It is undoubtedly a signal of weakness for a king to seek the aid of his sworn rivals. Just recalling the battle has my blood pumping. I shall ride quickly and then return to Dicer. Ruger and his footmen met the Andals head-on and it was just as described. The metal-clad knights fell into the flayed men with ease that took my breath. The Bolton spears may have warned them off in some places, but the bronze tips only bent and cracked the enemy's armor. Ruger eventually ordered what men he had left to wrestle the knights to the ground. They were an effective stoppage that allowed my army to secure victory. Though it was not a rout or even a slaughter, a true battle. I would note the brave actions of Harrin Hornwood, a minor vassal of the Boltons. When the Andals cut down part of my guard and threw down my banner, he and his men reclaimed it and returned it to me. A sensible man, Hornwood, and supposedly one of the Boltons' least favored bannermen. It was that night, after I gave suitable rewards to my commanders and arranged a betrothal for my brother, that I bid Ruger take a meal with me in private. For bringing me 7 stars head, my old friend, Barris, shall see his daughter wed to my house. Carlon always did enjoy stouter women and his Mormont bride will be with child soon enough. The huntsman joined me with the crown of the Red Kings shining upon his brow. Such swagger he had. The idiot plainly hadn't taken stock of his losses. When I pointed out that he had less than 2,000 men remaining, the man looked fit to break guest rights. Though he was quick to catch on. The Glovers and Umbers were camped between us and the dread fort, far enough away that they'd not shared bread and salt that day. He'd never make it there in one piece. I will give him his due, he blustered and haggled for another hour before finally seeing the bloodbath that would follow. What would my forefathers say if they were there that night? To see the Red King cast his crown down before the King of Winter. Such a curious title, perhaps unfitting, it seems too small. For what foe would dare stand against me now? Yes. These Andals have challenged not just one kingdom, but the whole north. They shall see what happens when winter comes. It is good to be home again. Andalos is a dirty, dry place. A land without weirwoods. I will not write of what I have done. I doubt any of my sons or grandsons will need a reminder of my victories. I return to the north to find a new daughter born and a brother who has made me proud. In my stead, Carlon ruled as the Stark in Winterfell. Duran has just learned to pronounce his own name and was safer under his care. What I did not expect was for betrayal to rise in my absence, more so after the Boltons came under my rule. The riders have always chafed, it seems they could not ignore my consolidation of the kingdom. As for the Boltons, Rugger will not march while both his sons live within Winterfell's walls. The traitors expected the Barrowlands to follow them to war for their own crown, but their hope was hollow. The Dustin instead sent word to Winterfell and joined Carlon on the march. Honors and privileges were given and the last of the riders to bear the name waits in the dungeon. I shall sentence him tomorrow. Then the arduous process of remapping the rills begins. For Carlon though, more is needed. I have not told him yet, but already I have spoken with Lord Umber and defined a border that will make up the western edge of his new lands. He shall keep a watch on the Narrow Sea and Andalos, while taking land and power from the Boltons. We are powerful now and I plan to wield the power of the north as it is needed. Our neighbors, these Andal kings, shall learn what it means to earn our fury. I await their insults with eager breath and an empty stomach. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Robb. The heir of Winterfell rocked back. Snapping his gaze up to see Theon Greyjoy, laughing at him from the doorway. Got your head in the books, Stark. Carefully, sliding his copies back in place, Robb re-wrapped the Stark histories. The words of ancient kings can be enchanting, I will not lie. Robb replied. Theon watched him tidy up the library, doused candles and refilled ink. Bran said you were going through the life of the hungry wolf. Learned any lessons? Robb chewed his lip. Theon was making another joke, but it was not a pointless question. Theon Stark had a taste for war, that much was clear even in the folk tales. His victories led to a thirst for it that had been seemingly unquenchable. Robb was eager to reach the writings about the Ironborn invasions and his battles beyond the wall. Warring with the Ironborn. Robb's father had continued that fine tradition, as had Theon's he supposed. Time changes many things, but Robb wondered if some traits were dug too deeply into the blood to be forgotten. After all, the Boltons had given up their crown for thousands of years. But not even 500 years ago they had struck their banners and fought against Winterfell, with the help of the Greystocks no less. Were men trapped by time? It wasn't a happy thought. Robb smiled as he half listened to Theon's newest story about a rumble with some lads at the tavern. They eventually make their way all the way into Wintertown and find their usual seats at the tavern. You've got more and more on your plate, Stark. Your Lord Father isn't giving out breaks every once and a while. Theon took a quaff of his strong ale. Robb nodded. I think he's realized that he'd been giving me a second son's education rather than an heir's. An heir's education. I suppose I should be getting one of those. Theon commented. Robb frowned. You are. Father doesn't exclude anything just because you're in the room. Theon pushed his third empty mug to the side. I know. A good man, your father. What he's teaching me, the Greyjoy looked morose, a state he only showed in public when he'd had too much to drink. Mercifully, the tavern was empty save for a few sleeping greybeards. I can't help but feel like a waste of space. How much can I learn about the Iron Islands from a solar in the north? Maester Lewin has given me some books, but books written by maesters from the Citadel are hardly going to tell how to captain a ship, how to rule my future lands. If I ever rule any future lands. Robb leaned forward. What do you mean, if? Your Lord Balon's only living son. You're his only heir. What does that have to do with anything? Theon argued. I'll be kept here until my father dies. That could take years. Look at the phrase. I'll be an old man with nothing but bastards and no wife. What a glorious Lord Reaper I'll be, to have never sailed a ship in my life. At best one of my uncles will rule in my name. What a glorious life that'll be. Theon was devastated and Robb had never heard such hurt from his friend. You should tell my father about your worries. He'll help you find some way around this. Robb insisted. Theon shook his head. Lord Stark has always kept his distance for a reason. All it would take is one raid, one word to the king that my father has broken the accord and my life is forfeit. If that day came, Lord Stark would do his duty. Theon reached for his refilled tankard, but Robb pulled it out of reach. I'm not a toddler, Robb. I know that me being here is meant to bring the Iron Islands closer to the throne once I become its lord. I wonder sometimes, though, if I'll not make a mess of it all. Fuck that. Robb stood and slammed his hand onto the table. Theon rocked back and tipped off his chair. You can't just sit there and mope, with nothing but tears and drink on your feet. We are going to go to my father and speak to him. He'll have some kind of idea. You can't just give up now, Theon. The red-headed Stark jumped over the table and pulled the taller boy up to his feet. Your namesake was called the Hungry Wolf, not because he laid on his back and waited for a meal to be dropped into his belly. His enemies gave him that name because when he saw a prize, he opened his jaws and devoured it whole. Now get moving, the sun won't wait. Robb shoved his foster brother out into the road and paid for their meals. Taking a deep breath as they walked back to the keep, Robb reflected on his earlier assumption. Time changes things. Theon Stark was the king of winter one day, and the king in the north the next. If one Theon could earn glory, then who was to say another couldn't do the same? Forward slash 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 forward slash. Chapter 12, Cautious Steps. Chapter text. A broken tower sat empty behind the walls of Winterfell. It was all but abandoned save for the crates and bags stored in the lower floors. This afternoon there was a young girl hiding among the nails and old leather. Arya looked through a crack in the main door, sweeping her gaze over the grounds, listening for any hint of her parents. Satisfied, she slunk back into the tower. Carefully climbing up the weathered stairs, Arya hopped into the makeshift bed she'd made for herself. The cot was nestled into the corner of the first floor's chamber, giving her a warm place to rest without being too far from the door. Mussing up the old blankets and sheets she'd covertly pulled out of her mother's storage chests, Arya eased back and took a deep breath. It was getting easier and easier to find Birina. She reached out, like she was trying to remember the details of a dream. The heartbeat of her wolf grew stronger in her chest until the rhythms matched. Just like that, Arya was in the Godswood laying with her mother. The smells washed over her, familiar now after weeks of living with them. Getting up, she gave her mother and father a lick before padding through the trees. The sun was high in the sky and there were plenty of people milling about. She could tell which servants worked for her family and which accompanied the visiting lords by how they treated her. Winterfell natives gave her enough space to move by unhampered, whereas the visitors sometimes changed direction or crossed the room. Taking the stairs into the main keep, Arya smelled her father. He was sitting at a table sharing a meal with a great big man with a neat beard and some kind of fishman on his tunic. Making her way over, Arya nosed at her father's knee. He looked down for a moment before smiling and giving her a satisfying scratch while he continued his conversation. "I'm sorry, what did you ask, woman?" "I was simply curious, my lord. While your offer is one I am very receptive to, I can't help but wonder what might have motivated it. I won't speak ill of anyone specifically, tongues wag as you well know, but there are whispers of young Lady Arya perhaps visiting the Sawins or even the Reeds. Regardless, White Harbor would welcome Lord Bran with open arms." Father took a sip of his wine. Arya wished she could understand what they were saying. The sounds were familiar, yet when Arya tried to understand them she could only make out that certain words meant actions. "My children are no longer babes. I've been looking to the past just as much as the future. I must do what is right for my family and my bannermen. It would be good to have my family know the North and the North to know them," her father replied. The large man nodded with a sly smile. "Then I applaud your wisdom, Lord Eddard. On another note, I reviewed the proposal you sent. A road leading to Moat Cailin is certainly an interesting idea." Her father's hand returned to the table and Arya quickly lost interest. Leaving the dining hall behind, she took a side passage down into the kitchens. There were always some leftover scraps for her and her siblings. What she got instead of meat was the sight of her brother gnawing on a bone by the ovens. Walking over, she got ready for a bit of play when she noticed there was something strange about summer. No, it wasn't summer. Laying in the kitchens was someone else, someone behind Summer's eyes. Her heartbeat skipped and Birina's didn't. Arya was back in the tower. Pushing off her blankets, Arya ran out of the tower. She bumped past a few guards and made her way into the family wing of the keep. She ran right up to Bran and Rackon's door and started knocking frantically. Bran tore the door open and pulled his sister inside. The boys' quarters were messy, with Rackon's toys spilling across the floor and the desk covered in Bran's drawings. Her younger brother's eyes were wide as he settled her onto his bed. "Was that you in the kitchens?" he whispered. "Yes, you can see through Summer." She smiled back. He nodded. "I started dreaming a while ago. I thought I was just making it up, but then I tore into a shirt and woke up to find the pieces still in Summer's teeth." Bran and Arya took a moment to just smile at each other. "Do you know what this means?" Arya asked. "Werewolves." Bran gasped, his 7-year-old mind taking in her announcement. "Have you told anyone?" Arya frowned. "Not yet, I didn't want Mother to get mad." "That makes sense." Bran agreed. "What else have you dreamed into?" "What do you mean?" "I mean other than Birina. I go into Summer lots, but sometimes I dream about this raven that's nesting near the stables," he explained. Arya made plans to meet up with her brother the next day and talk more. With a goodbye she fled to her own quarters. After ensuring Sansa wasn't around, she crawled into bed and stewed on her jealousy. Bran was younger than her and he was already a better warg. It wasn't fair, she could be just as good as Bran. She got up and went to the small window overlooking one of the courtyards. Ignoring the people, she scanned the roofs of her massive home. Winterfell was the biggest place in the whole world to her. There had to be more than a single raven roosting here. There. A grouse. The brown-feathered bird was Theon's favorite practice target when out hunting. Taking a deep breath, Arya kept her eyes locked on the bird. Her heartbeat grew louder and she eventually heard the rapid pace of another heartbeat. One quieter and fainter than Birina's. Arya started sweating, her vision was darkening as her heart attempted to catch up with the birds. It became harder and harder, Arya was running out of breath. The light from the window grew dimmer and dimmer until all was black. Forward slash 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 forward slash. "Arya! Arya, please wake up." A voice that sounded like Mother drifted to her ears as Arya slowly felt her body shift and move. She reached out and grabbed onto the warm hand resting on cheek. Arya opened her eyes and looked up at her mother, who smiled down at her. "Are you okay, dear?" Rubbing her eyes, Arya thought she felt like green eyes had trampled her. Her muscles felt sore and her head had a dull ache. "I'm fine." "What are you doing here, Mother?" Arya lied. Caitlin pulled the wet cloth from her daughter's forehead and exchanged it for a goblet of water. Carefully bringing the cup up for Arya to sip. "Your sister found you unconscious in your chambers. When you wouldn't wake, she panicked and fetched us," Mother explained. "Arya, what happened?" Maester Lewin was unsure what could have caused this. "What do you mean?" Arya asked. "You were in a dreamless sleep for the rest of the day and night." "A whole day?" Arya exclaimed. The door to her chamber opened and her father entered with Born and Maester Lewin not far behind. That was my reaction. Her father knelt at her bedside and held her hand. "You had us worried, very worried." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Arya caught her father in a desperate hug. "I don't know what happened." "I believe I can answer that, my lord," Born added. "Arya, how long have you been skin charning for?" The Stark parents turned to their guest, who was staring at Arya. The young wolf tried hard to keep a straight face but crumpled under the intense stare of her teacher. 2 moons. She admitted. "Into Birina, I assume." Born guessed, which was answered by Arya's slow nod. "May I ask what was different this time?" Arya pulled her knees to her chin. "I was trying to go into a bird." Born sucked a harsh breath in. "That was very dangerous, my lady. Very dangerous and very unwise," he rebuked. "Lord Stark, I'm afraid this is ultimately your judgment, but I must ask that Lady Arya be forbidden from any warging until she is deemed ready." You can't. Arya protested. Her father firmly held her shoulder. Arya, this is a serious matter. You are meddling with things without our knowledge. You could have been injured or worse. I won't do it again, just don't say I can't dream about Birina anymore. Arya pleaded. Her father sighed, I'm sorry Arya, but until Born and I permit it, you are to cease this magic. If you don't you will be punished, he declared. Tears welled in Arya's eyes. It's not fair, she screamed. Why do I have to stop when Bran can still do it? Bran. Her father said. Arya realized her mistake too late. Born and father both leaned in. Arya, tell me the truth, has Bran also been skin changing? It took only an hour for her parents to wring every last detail out of her, about her early dreams, her hideaway in the broken tower, meeting Bran in the kitchens and his bragging about the raven. Mother was obviously disturbed while Lewin seemed curious. By the end of it all, Born looked amazed and troubled. He was explaining to father something about how fast it took her and her brother to harness their gifts, whatever that meant. He was obviously surprised and Arya felt some pride in that. On the downside, her mother informed her that she and Bran would be dusting the crypts for the foreseeable future. Worst of all, she had to miss out on the next camping night with Born. Life really was unfair sometimes. Forward slash 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 forward slash. One last shot, Jon. All right, Sir Roderick. Taking a deep breath of the chilled air, Jon pulled his bowstring back to his chin. His callus throbbed as he lined up his aim. The target had 5 arrows scattered across it. Jon let out his breath and released the string simultaneously. The arrow flew down the range and slammed into the target a few inches from his tight groupings near the top. They weren't hitting the eye, but Sir Roderick looked satisfied. You've made significant improvement, Jon. A commendable job. Sir Roderick complimented. Jon unstrung his bow and set it back onto the rack. Thank you, sir. You've been very patient with me. Roderick clapped his shoulder. Patience has nothing to do with it. All masters at arms wish for eager students. Just a few moons ago you were still occasionally missing the targets entirely. I'm afraid I'll never be a master marksman. Jon commented. No one expects you to be. What matters, is that if you're ever cornered with nothing but a bow, you won't be at risk of killing a tree rather than the enemy. Roderick advised. Jon wrapped up his used arrows and bid his instructor goodbye. The morning light was waning and it looked as if an afternoon shower was rolling in. Taking a path back through the courtyard, Jon stopped to observe the group of nobles gathered around Winterfell's training yard. The bannermen would be leaving at the end of the week, closing their half-moon visit. For Jon, seeing father interact with his vassals was the most important part of the event. It was one thing to hear about how a lord should interact with his men, but another to watch Lord Stark weave between casual conversation and diplomacy. The few nights his father could spend with his children showed just how fatigued he was. Being the most powerful lord in the north came with its own stresses in equal number to its privileges. Jon had a better understanding of the duties and expectations of leadership now. Jon was still a young boy, so he couldn't deny the pride he felt when the lords and ladies showed his father such respect and loyalty. They sought his opinions, his approval, and vied for his favor. Old dreams of being Lord of Winterfell were long dead, tucked away with childhood heartbreaks. He couldn't deny it though, and reasoned it was not a treasonous thought to yearn for that type of prestige. In truth, he didn't desire to steal Robb's birthright. What he wanted was respect, authority, and to inspire loyalty in his peers. Lord Robb. Great Jon Umber called out to the heir of Winterfell, who swiftly joined their conversation, while Jon watched. Robb had done well to ingratiate himself with their visitors. Some of them, most notably Lord Umber and Karstark, had been taking his brother's measure, subtle questions about the old gods, some comments on northern history. Born explained that the lords, in their own ways, wished to ascertain just how much of Lady Stark's influence was present in her son. The building of the September, while seen as a kind gesture, was nonetheless a worrying piece of information for the bannermen. Robb had taken the initiative to crush any doubts about him. He and John had been permitted to join the lords on their last hunt of the celebrations, and Rob had the honor of felling a sizable buck single-handedly, impressing the lords. Rob caught sight of John and beckoned him over. John smiled but shook his head and turned inside. As he paced through the keep he saw Sansa and Arya sitting in one of the inner courtyards. His sisters had a collection of instruments spread out with them. They weren't alone either, a number of noble daughters were there. John noticed the Mandaeli sisters dancing to Sansa's flute tune. The contingent from White Harbor had arrived a few days after Sansa's celebration. Apparently a storm had damaged the docks of their seat and Lord Mandaeli had been delayed. They were polite enough and Lord Mandaeli was a sight to behold all on his own. He chuckled as Arya picked up a drum to play along with Sansa. It made him happy to see his youngest sister laughing alongside the other girls. He'd heard no words of complaint from Arya about any name-calling in weeks. It most likely helped that the girls Sansa was becoming close to were not great beauties or perfect dancers either. John made his way deeper into the keep, taking a longer path around the walls toward his father's solar. Seeing his brother and sisters distracted John from the swell of nerves building in his spine. He'd confirmed with Steward Poole that his father would be handling some finances after he broke his fast. It was one of the few times Lord Stark was free of other company. It was his best chance to garner a private moment. The young Stark would have preferred to amend this meeting until the lords departed, but last night's announcement had backed him into a corner. It was fortunate that Lord Stark had taken the children aside to inform them of his decision before the feast. // Lords, ladies, Northmen. Lord Stark's voice silenced conversations and froze dancers. Please be seated. I wish to make an announcement. The benches and tables filled quickly. As we share this last feast, I wish to thank you all for your gifts, both in objects and friendship. I see before me a finer collection of noblemen and women than any other kingdom in Westeros. He proclaimed. Cheers and toasts rang out with shouts of Stark and the quiet wolf echoing inside the ancient stone. I have been blessed by the gods with strong walls and swords. Above all that, I am most thankful for my beautiful wife and my many children. Lady Catelyn blushed when toasts to her were called, some even named her the Mother of Winterfell. The cold demeanor of some had been warmed by the wine and ale. Lord Stark continued in a somber tone, many of you knew my father, Lord Rickard, and my older brother, Brandon. His solemnness resonated with the audience. Some of you may even remember Brandon and Lyanna riding in the rills and visiting the Barrowlands. My father ensured that as a Stark, my brother would know his lands, and it was a sad fate that he never had the chance to rule it. No tears fell from Lord Stark's eyes, but his grief swam in his tone. I look back on my own fostering with fondness, and I would not deny my own children the opportunity to forge bonds of friendships and more with their future allies. The mentions of fostering sent the entire hall into a storm of whisper and chatter. Lord Karstark, he called out. The tall man rose from his seat, his grey beard pooling across his chest. My lord. Rickard Karstark called back. Would you bear the honor and the responsibility of fostering my son, Rob? He has much to learn, but I hope you have seen firsthand his convictions and spirit. I believe that the descendants of Prince Carlon the Noble would help him grow into a good man. The Lord of Carhold's gaunt face stretched into a smile. I would bear it gladly, Lord Stark. Carhold shall be a place of safety and plenty, he responded. The hall erupted in applause, a mixture of genuine pride and some begrudging jealousy. Lord Stark was not done, however. He nodded to Lord Rickard, then shifted his attention to another table. Lord Mandaeli. My second son, Bran, has ambitions to become a master of the sword and saddle. White Harbor has always held steadfast, and your warriors are among the North's finest. Would you bear the honor and responsibility of fostering him? Your forefathers landed on our shores 1,000 years ago, and never once have the wardens of the White Knife failed us. Lord Mandaeli's large cheeks were folding in on themselves to contain his grin. We would, my lord. The white walls of Newcastle shall give young Brandon all the skills he desires and more. Lord Stark nodded in thanks and allowed Lord Wyman to enjoy his praise. Lord Robert Glover. The man's deeply lined face barely twitched as he stood and bowed. In the place of your brother, Lord Galbart, would you agree to take on the honor and responsibility of fostering my younger daughter, Arya? She has heart and a great love for the land. Can I trust your house to nurture and educate her, so that she may become an exemplar of House Stark? Since the fall of the Warg Kings, Deepwood Motte has served as a shield of the West, and the Glovers have been valiant masters. Lord Robert nodded. In the name of my brother, I accept this responsibility. His solemnness might have earned scorn in King's Landing, but Robert received some of the loudest applause, and far and away the most congratulations. Likely the lords around him thought it proper that House Glover be rewarded for the actions of Ethan Glover during the rebellion. Lord Stark noticed the attention Sansa was now garnering, with some minor lords even casting their gaze to Jon, who sat with the Stark guards. If Rickon had not already been put to bed, he'd likely be more of a focus. As for my eldest daughter, Sansa shall remain here at Winterfell, but not alone. I shall be inviting ladies to act as companions for my daughter, and Winterfell shall be open to visits from a number of houses in the coming years. With a final nod, Lord Stark gestured to the minstrels, and the music rose while he sat back and leaned to his wife. The hall was bustling, and no doubt the next day would see Maester Lewin busy, as documents and letters flew from ink to raven then across the skies. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Jon had been shaken by the news. Living in Winterfell without Robb and Arya was unthinkable to him. Despite Sansa's improved demeanor towards him and Lady Stark's somewhat tolerant attitude, Jon knew that by the time Robb rode out in a few years, he wished to already be gone. Clutched in his hands was the letter of introduction Born had been kind enough to write for him. The shepherd adamantly refused to send the message to Torrin Wolftongue without Lord Stark's express permission and approval. Thus, Jon now stood outside the solar, working up the courage to enter. Swallowing, Jon knocked quickly on the door. "Enter," his father commanded. Slipping into the warm chamber, he bowed to Lord Stark out of habit. The formality, which only a year ago separated the Lord and his natural son, had been warped by the strengthened ties of the Stark family. His father smiled and leaned back from his desk, covered with account books and missives. Sticking out on the corner of the surface were two open books, Cregan Stark's journals. "What did you need, Jon?" Looking back to his father, Jon shuffled forward, keeping the letter tucked behind his belt. The news about the fosterings went well. He noted. "Yes, the lords have been waiting for this. More than I first assumed," father admitted. Licking his lips, Jon pushed on. "Do any of these plans involve me?" Lord Stark's eyes snapped to Jon's. He frowned. "No, Jon. If they did, I would have told you with the rest of the children." Jon stopped himself from mirroring a frown. Keeping his mouth shut, he pulled the letter out and placed it in the center of the desk. Noticing his son's silence, Lord Stark plucked the letter up and unfolded it. His forehead creased as he passed through Born's writings. Looking up from the letter, Jon decided to cut his father off first. "I want to leave Winterfell. I want to see the North." Jon plowed forward. "I would love to serve Robb one day. This is my home. Some days I can't even imagine waking up somewhere else. Now though, with everyone leaving, I don't want the castle to become a cage. I want to belong somewhere I can be more than just Lord Stark's other son." Jon stopped, and took in a number of deep breaths. It had come out without much control on his part. The fear he'd pushed down earlier had rushed back up and taken control of his lungs. Coming back to, Jon watched his father for a reaction. Seeing nothing but a blank look and sad eyes, Jon suddenly felt like a foolish toddler. Turning on his heel, he charged out of the solar. He preferred to receive chastisement later than to have his wishes broken before his eyes. Forward slash 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 forward slash. The room was empty and undisturbed, Jon's visit so abrupt that Ned took a second to look at the letter left behind to reassure himself it happened at all. Rising, Ned walked over to his hearth and contemplated throwing Born's letter into the flames. Kill the idea when it was still nothing but words on a page. Taking a deep breath, his mind turned back to the books resting on his desk. Cregan Stark, the old man in the north, was one of the few Starks that was well known to the southern courts and small folk alike. His writings proved that the general perception of Cregan being a dangerously cunning man and a bit of a brute, was nearly true. As far as any outside reputation can be. Crean had not lived a stable life. Deaths, successions, famines and a number of crises mostly gone unremembered by the maesters, had wizened the elderly lord. Ned had already begun copying down pages of information and maps made by his forefather for future reference. In particular, the extensive section of southern politics from his time as hand to the Targaryens. Unlike some other journals, Cregan wrote little of his personal thoughts and emotions. His children being one of the few subjects that elicited a semblance of prose from the man. Grief over his heir's death in Dawn led to a streak of protectiveness for his second son, Jonel. In his waning days of health, Cregan lamented that Jonel had been kept in Winterfell, sheltered but also isolated from his peers and younger siblings. Cregan felt that Jonel had missed out on something and admitted that his heir had come to resent him for chaining him so tightly to his side. Ned looked out into Winterfell's grounds. There, in the small clearing of the godswood visible from his chamber, he saw the form of Mor herding his pups. Where the rest of the wolves were lunging and tumbling, the clear white pelt of Ghost stayed pressed to Mor's side. Ned felt a throb in his chest, his heart quickened for a few seconds. Ghost should be out among his brothers and sisters, he wouldn't be able to hunt if he did nothing but cling to the legs of others. Pressing a hand over his breast, Ned took deep breaths to calm his blood. Mor, meanwhile, leaned down and pushed Ghost forward. The pup was unsure and turned back, which prompted Mor to give him a firm lick and another push. Cautiously, Ghost trotted off into the fray and in no short time was howling and jumping like the rest of them. Smiling, Ned looked down at Bourne's letter. Striding to his desk, Ned pulled a sheet of parchment from its drawer and refreshed his quill. If his distant cousin was going to be watching over Jon, there would need to be expectations and a measure of trust established first. Pausing, Ned realized he would need to come up with some reason for sending Jon to a supposedly vicious island, ruled by nobles who only barely qualify as lords. Whatever trouble he'd have to face, for Jon, for Lyanna's son, Ned would cross any obstacle. // Chapter 13, Scattered Pack. Chapter text. Time flies as quick as a raven and slow as a snail, or so old Nan liked to say. The elderly caretaker was focused on the youngest Stark at the moment. Rickon had fussed all day. Father had taken their youngest sibling aside and explained that Bran, Jon, and Arya had left and would not be back for quite a while. If Robb was any younger, he'd be as miffed as Rickon. Age did not permit him such immaturity, he was the heir to Winterfell. He'd hid any tears and trembles in the strong embraces he'd given Bran and Arya, only letting some of his stress escape when he and Jon had bid each other farewell. Jon's mop of hair riding away from the castle had nearly broken his composure. The entire castle felt empty. Breakfasts were over quickly, with less conversation and even fewer arguments. Mother concentrated on Rickon and Sansa while Father focused on him. It was a new experience, having Father's undivided attention. In the short months following the separation, Robb's parents took an unexpected amount of time with him alone. Days of lessons with Father, trips into Wintertown, and calming nights by the fire listening to him recount tales from the Vale. Theon quickly left for his own adventure, accompanying Steward Poole on a visit to Torrens Square. Winterfell's ward was set to spend the next few moons learning about the art of sailing firsthand, along with a number of other topics related to trade and agriculture. His friend had been so excited for the trip he'd barely stepped foot in the Wintertown brothel, though his taste for ale hadn't disappeared. Now bereft of the other boys, outside of the yard, Robb spent his downtime either in the stables or the library. Walder was a well-meaning man, not to mention a deft hand with the horses considering his size, but there was only so much Robb could monopolize his time. The stable master had a family to look after. Thus on stormy nights, when the castle had settled down, Robb found his comfort in the library. The secret Stark histories that had once seemed so insurmountable were now manageable. Thanks to Maester Lewyn, Bourne, Jon, and Robb, not to mention Father, the thick volumes were steadily being sorted, organized, and most importantly, copied. The Hungry Wolf had fascinated Robb and he'd devoured as much as he could find written by and about the notorious king. When that well ran dry, he turned to some of the names that Theon Stark himself had mentioned, kings of winter who had ruled in the truly old days, back before the Andals and before the North as Robb knew it was formed. Starks who had looked at their borders and saw not neighbors, but vassals to be. Men and women like King Jon and Queen Delra, who scoured the coast of the bite of both raiders, pirates, and disloyal nobles. Their crowning achievement, the Wolf's Den, cemented Stark hold on the bite for thousands of years. Jon's son, Rakard the Ranger, built on his parents' legacy and annexed the Neck, defeating the Marsh King. Conquest was more than just winning a battle, as Robb was learning from both his own ancestors and recent history in equal measure. The only reason that King Jon was able to build the Wolf's Den was by winning the allegiance of House Rudel, the ancient rulers of the Sheep's Head Hills and owners of deep quarries. That stone did not come cheap. King Jon's initial forays in diplomacy were met with blatant hostility. House Rudel's grey-bearded patriarch and prideful heir had no desire to submit to House Stark, and their proximity to the Widow Kings gave them a measure of leverage in negotiations. Rudel's eldest daughter, however, had a different idea. Robb was shocked as he read Queen Delra's account of the planning and negotiating with the Lady of Sheep's Head. Bribes were given, secrets passed and mercenaries hired. In the end, the Starks orchestrated for Lord Rudel and his heir to have a chance encounter with a band of suspiciously well-armed raiders, that ended in their tragic passings. Before the surviving vassals could begin fighting for the right to marry the newly named Lady Rudel, King Jon arrived in force to protect and ensure the lady's rule. It was dishonorable to say the least. Robb wouldn't have called it assassination, yet the entire affair stank of it. Except the results spoke for themselves. The quarries were opened, the Sheep's Head Hills swore fealty to Winterfell, and the Wolf's Den was built. Ruthlessness went hand in hand with mercy. The logs made to account for the deaths and births during harsh winters proved that honor and justice existed in times of plenty with little problem, but Robb was learning that the Starks of old had a little problem with discarding their pride for victory. The account of the Greystocks and their rebellion was especially poignant. As a cadet branch granted rule of the Wolf's Den, they served as a powerful extension of royal authority and maintained a strong presence at sea. Fierce as winter were their words. From what Robb could find, they had held little wealth, most of their resources going towards skirmishes with both pirates and Valyman. A letter to Winterfell indicated their fleet and men suffered heavily during the war across the water. It was during the reign of King Ben Stark that the Boltons rose in rebellion for the first time since they had bent the knee. Their war was carefully planned, and to accomplish their goals, the Red Kings reached out to the disgruntled and envious Greystocks. There was little written about the rebellion aside from a small mention of King Ben receiving a warning before the traitors first struck. The Bolton lord who'd orchestrated the uprising had certainly been skilled with words but was outclassed on the field. Key battles were won quickly and overwhelmingly in the king's favor. This military might was attributed to King Ben's close advisor, Vensawin. The Boltons crumbled and the dread fort surrendered when the would-be Red King was paraded in chains. The Greystocks put up a token effort, but their own armies faced mass desertions after the taking of the dread fort. It only increased as the King of Winter closed in on the Wolf's Den. What few battles they had fought left the cadet branch whittled down to a trio of brothers with no issue of their own. All three would be the last to bear the name Greystock and were sent to serve the rest of their lives on the wall. All in all, the fate of the Greystocks was a well-told tale that had survived through the centuries relatively intact. The message was all too clear. The Starks were not above removing threats to their rule, even if those threats shared a name. At least the Greystocks' punishment ended at the war. Robb had found a vague fragment from an even older journal that described exploits of House Stark when they were subjugating the mountain clans, their first vassals. The most vicious of their enemies were called the Horn-Helmed, and rather than bend the knee to the Direwolf, one of the first Stark kings chased the clan all the way across the Bay of Ice, exiling them beyond the wall, forbidding their return south upon pain of death. Coming back to his senses, Robb reached up and checked the buckles on his saddle. His horse was one of several waiting in Winterfell's courtyard as guards and stable hands rushed around them. He noticed Father speaking with Sir Roderick, who had already mounted his own steed, then he made his way over to Robb. "You have everything?" Father asked. Robb nodded. "Nothing but my old clothes were left behind." "Good, good." His father bent down to give Grey Wind a parting pet. Making eye contact, Father stepped forward and gently gripped Robb's shoulders. "You are my son, Robb," I am proud of you and your future holds so much promise, I'm sure of it. Father's quiet resolve had Rob holding down a blush. I'll try my best, Father Rob vowed. The north is a harsh place, son, but it is the hearts of our people that keep the cold away. Don't forget where you come from or where you will return. Father said. I could never. Rob protested. I'll be the warden of the north one day, I can't well do that from Carhold. You certainly picked up Benjamin's wit. His father laughed. Take this opportunity to learn, out of my shadow, what kind of warden you will be, Father advised. The north is a heavy burden, not borne easily. Father's smile was strained now, tight. Before Rob could respond, he was pulled into an embrace and then left behind as his father ordered for the escort to make ready. Soon they were on the road towards Carhold. Rob took in his last sights of Winterfell. The strong walls, familiar halls and the image of his father, shoulders hunched and eyes strained, flashed before him. Rob kept his worries hidden. What would Winterfell, and the North, require of him? What would it take from him? Could he give it, when called upon? Forward slash 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 forward slash. The lands of the Karstarks were much the same as his own family's. There were differences. The air had a more persistent chill and you could occasionally catch the scent of the sea on the breeze. The endless sight of the wolf's wood was absent, replaced by hills dotted with brush rising between thick patches of trees. They'd taken the long route, following the King's Road up to Umberlands, and after a short visit to Last Hearth, they took the older tracks east. After 2 weeks they crossed into Karstark territory. A few members of Rob's escort had been there before, both as guards to Lord Stark and as message carriers. There wasn't much to say according to them, though he was warned that the vassals of Lord Karstark tended to be more vocal, more belligerent, than what Rob was used to. The frequency of wilderling raids and the more common bandit groups made the lords of these lands fully willing to take any advantage they could get. It was something to keep in mind at the very least. His first sight of Carhold was interesting. Unlike Winterfell, Carhold was a smaller castle, built strong but compact. It laid across 2 tall hills above a forested river, with the keep connected to the main gate by an ironwood drawbridge. A smaller hill sat a ways away from the castle, dotted with houses and buildings. The countryside was certainly active. They passed by fishermen, merchants and laborers every so often. Each group slowed when they caught sight of the Direwolf banner, briefly paying their respects. Rob noticed none of the travelers were unarmed, even the occasional elder had a small knife or hatchet strapped somewhere. Rob took note of a large party emerging from Carhold's gate. They are prepared for us, Sir Roderick said. Father had given him 30 men for the trip and 10 were to remain permanently. Well over 50 guards approached on horseback, with at least one Karstark leading them. From this distance, Rob knew it wasn't Torrhen or Eddard, so it must be Harryon, the heir. Lord Rob, welcome to Carhold, the noble proclaimed. Harryon was only a few years older than Rob, but he already had the beginnings of a thick beard with a fierce slant to his features. Your hospitality is greatly appreciated, Lord Harryon. Lady Alis sends her regards. Harryon smiled, I expected as much. Her letters have been thick as bark lately, she and Lady Sansa are not ones to be idle. The 2 parties merged and moved uphill. Not a day went by where they hadn't found some new inspiration, Rob commented. Quick chatter filled the air as they passed across the drawbridge, the courtyard beyond was filled to the brim. It seemed Lord Karstark wished for every member of his household and staff to witness Rob's arrival. It was a pleasure to reunite with the other Karstark sons. In quick order, he was bundled off into a tour of the castle complete with introductions to the steward, master of arms, captain of the guard, and on and on. Rob barely had a moment to breathe before he was seated at a feast. His fostering began at a brisk pace and would not slow down for many weeks. It became apparent that even without the library, there would be little time to rest. Over the next 6 moons his days were filled with training, riding and dozens of hours spent either with Lord Rickard or Harryon. Rob saw every inch of Carhold, doing his best to learn which servants were in charge, which guards had the most sense and who was favored. Harryon Karstark took his duties as seriously, urging Rob to tag along as he kept a close watch on his home. Gossip, rumor, feuds, Harry On kept abreast of it all. To be sure, the man rarely intervened or meddled. Rob questioned all the effort it took, but Harry On proved the wiser when an envoy from a farmstead arrived, bearing an official plea for assistance. A large number of their cattle had been stolen. Harry On stepped forward and added that hunters in the same area were also noting suspicious tracks and a lack of game. Whereas normally Lord Ricard might have sent out a small party to assess the situation first, with both the farmer's word and his own son's confirmation, Rob's host had all the proof he needed. Harry On, Rob, and Torrin set out 2 days later with 30 guards and a trio of hunters. With Grey Wind at their side, hounds were unneeded. Their search eventually led them to a sparsely used patch of land northwest of Carhold, running close to the Bay of Seals. They found evidence of temporary camps and the bodies of 2 herdsmen. Harry On had declared their prey wildlings, crafty ones too. Likely experienced, since fresh raiders usually kept close to the wall. Experienced was an understatement. The raiders had caught on to their hunters and ambushed Rob's company days later. Small pits in the trail tripped the front riders and in the confusion, arrows peppered them. Harry On rallied the men and on foot he charged the hill the raiders had hidden in. The battle was a blur to Rob. He recalled moments. A bronze spear, skewering a Karstark man. An axe, crashing into Torrin's arm. A woman's neck, crushed in Grey Wind's jaws. The blade father had given him, cutting into an old man's gut. Of the 20 wildlings, 4 surrendered. Rob was surprised when Harry On declared that they would judge the survivors there and then. They hadn't the time or the manpower to bring the prisoners back with them, not if they wanted to keep their own injured men healthy. Normally, Harry On's word would have been final. He was in essence acting with Lord Karstark's voice. Rob, however, was technically acting with Lord Stark's. He could have pushed for the prisoners to be brought back to Carhold, but Rob knew he was the follower in this case, and to usurp Harry On's authority would be an insult. He agreed and took 2 of the heads himself. The first time he had given the sentence and swung the sword. // Lord Karstark was understandably proud of his sons and his ward. Torrin's wounded arm scarred quite badly, but otherwise, he would recover fully. Rob's relationship with Harry On and the other men of Carhold shifted upon his return. A few weeks passed before he noticed. They were freer with their interactions, whereas before there had been a noticeable distance. Now the guards and servants treated him more like Torrin and Eddard, as a true member of the household. It implied a level of respect and trust that was earned in combat, a unique relationship that was formed in spite of his house name. Regardless of the new dynamic within Carhold, Rob still longed for his family. Especially so after sending off a batch of letters home, with details of the wilderling ambush to his father. John's letter went unsent, he wasn't even sure where to send it. Memories prompted Rob to take a day's trip to the town of Hilltop. A modest market offered nothing special and the ale was average, bordering on poor. It took 2 pints of that mediocre drink to embolden Rob. He tried to subtly question the innkeep as to where he might find some shepherds. Subtlety was not his strong suit and the innkeep was most definitely having a laugh at his expense. Awkward emphasis and double meanings rewarded Rob with directions to an older building along the outskirts of the town, placed right by the path to the Godswood. The home had 2 floors over a sturdy stone foundation. The door was inlaid with a striking carving, depicting a sun over what Rob guessed was a heartree. Grey Wind was relaxed as he approached. Rob took a deep breath, then knocked on the door. A woman with brown hair and thin eyebrows answered. She was dressed in a thick coat and skirt, with a sheep pelt drawn over her shoulders. Any greetings were interrupted when her gaze locked onto Grey Wind. She pulled her shoulders up, straightening as she addressed him. "Lord Stark, I presume?" she passively asked. He gave a slight bow. "Rob Stark. I was hoping to speak with a shepherd." "Truly? Then we would be honored to host you." "I am Kara, please come in, my lord," she answered. Rob caught her eyes still sliding over the direwolf. "Stay," Rob ordered Grey Wind, while he moved inside. The door was shut softly and Rob took in the large common room. A healthy fire sat in a pit in the middle of the room. The pit itself was surrounded by carpets of thick furs with low tables covered in wood, stone and some kind of tools. We have a guest, Addis. Lord Robb Stark has come to speak with a shepherd. Kara had walked over to a younger girl, probably in her 20s. Addis, he supposed, bowed from her place at a table dipping strips of linen into some discolored liquid. He accepted her greeting but stayed focused on Kara. His host had drifted over to the stairway nestled in the corner and disappeared onto the second floor. Addis offered him bread and salt, which he accepted graciously. Just as he swallowed his mouthful, Kara returned leading another woman, perhaps a few years older than his mother. She sat down at one of the low tables and gestured for him to join her. The furs were evidently set over some kind of straw pillows, they were quite comfortable. Lord Stark, welcome to our home. I am Dewin Red Hand. Kara said that you were seeking a shepherd. Robb nodded. Yes. In truth, I would normally have written to the shepherd of Winterfell but a letter seemed too impersonal. I was hoping you might have some wisdom. Dewin smiled, depending on the subject, I worry we may not be of much help to you. Are you not a shepherd? Robb asked. Oh yes, and unlike Kara or Addis, I grew up on Skagos. Then why would you be less capable than my home's shepherd? A young man, less experienced by all accounts. Robb wondered. It is the nature of our people. Roots grow to fit their soil and while a tree's trunk may mirror its neighbors, beneath the ground they are unique. If you wish to know of war or perhaps sword work then you will find disappointment here. Is your name not Dewin Red Hand? That title strikes me as one born of battle. Robb commented. Addis hid a laugh. They call me Red Hand, Lord Robb, because I have delivered so many children and animals. They joke that my fingers have been dyed red from the wombs. Dewin answered. Robb's blush was caused by the fire and his own cloak, certainly not by embarrassment. Healing may be just what I need. Robb insisted. It has been nearly half a year since I left home and every day I learn more and more what it takes to fulfill a lord's duty. Do you fear your birthright? Kara asked. Robb swallowed. I fear I may fall short of it. He admitted. Then leave, Dewin said. What? Robb was shocked, that had been the last answer he'd expected. Put together a nice little chest of coins, hire a ship and leave. You wouldn't be the first lordling to buy a life of comfort rather than duty. Dewin added. I would never. Robb exclaimed. Nothing could force me to abandon my duty, not to mention my family. Dewin looked at him closely. You seem so certain. Of course I'm certain. Robb asserted. I may be uncertain of my ability but I have no doubt in my conviction. Nothing could make me stray from my duty. Lord Stark, you are a man, a mortal man. Dewin told him. My father is a man, a dutiful and honorable man. Your father has never made a mistake. Has never strayed from his role. Dewin asked. Jon's face flashed through Robb's mind. The stories that Septum Ordain used to tell about bastards being born from sin. He'd never truly thought of Jon as a burden, less so had he considered that sin to be his father's. There will inevitably come a time, my lord, when you will be forced to choose between what duty dictates and what you desire. Dewin counseled. If you hold too tightly to either motivation, you will find nothing but tragedy. Robb stood abruptly. His face was closed off. Thank you for your hospitality, shepherds. I bid you a good day. Robb threw open the front door. Grey Wind. To me. As the young Stark strode back towards town. He resolved to push the shepherd's words from his mind. I'm a Stark. Robb reassured himself. I will always do my duty. Forward slash 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 forward slash. More moons passed, life continued. Robb grew more skilled while he became closer to his foster brothers. Grey Wind grew larger and had the run of the kennels. The other dogs learned quickly not to challenge the wolf, though the people of Carhold had not truly taken to his companion. Grey Wind himself wasn't enamored with Carhold. The Godswood was quite small in comparison to Winterfell's and he missed his pack as much as Robb missed his family. Robb must have shown progress, because soon enough he'd been instructed to accompany Harry on another journey. The trust of Lord Karstark was not easily given. Their goal was to mediate between two feuding houses in the south. House Tarmed and Brookbirth were minor houses that both held territory near a plentiful river. Their disputes had grown in magnitude over the years. This was the fifth time in 15 years that House Carstark had been forced to intervene. Their party arrived at Tarmed Tower quickly, only to find an encampment of Brookbirth soldiers within eyesight of the keep walls. Rob watched Harry cloister himself for a week with both lords, fending off the looming battle with reams of papers, complaints and accusations. Rob kept the guards on their toes and ensured their party was fed and watered. He learned quite a lot from the negotiations. Particularly how reason and authority could be thrown into the dirt by sheer pride. It became clear that this new dispute concerned a dozen different matters, some new, some old. All of it seemed irrelevant to Rob. These houses were being ordered to set down their arms, and if they refused, House Carstark would force them to. He was confident that Harry would eventually force their compliance. The Carstark heir was skilled at arguing people into submission. That certainty was why Rob was surprised when the Tarmed steward approached him one evening, 2 weeks into their visit. "Lord Stark, forgive my interruption." The steward was middle-aged with traces of grey in his scant hair. They were not alone. 4 Carstark guards stood by Rob and a trio of Tarmed men had entered with the steward. "It is no bother, I was just going to enjoy the night air," Rob replied. The steward checked the hole they stood in. His followers were armed and nervous. "I must ask you to accompany me, my lord. I have just received evidence of yet more Brookbirth crimes. Their guilt is now certain," the steward declared. "Why come to me then? Lord Harry shall pass judgment, not I." "I will, my lord," the steward insisted. "But I wished to ensure there was another who could verify my words. If you'll follow me." Rob was swiftly taken down to the small dungeon underneath the tower. More Tarmed guards watched a cell, where 4 men sat chained to the wall, rough bandages covered their arms and faces. "What is the meaning of this?" Rob demanded. "These poachers were captured on the edges of our lands. That one," the steward gestured to the prisoner in finer clothes, "killed one of our woodsmen." He handed Rob a small knife. Its hilt was covered in dried blood, but visible on the pommel was the Carstark sigil. The woodsman was one of Lord Carstark's favoured men. Rob guessed. He'd seen a few small folk with these treasures, rewards for exemplary service to their liege lords. "Yes. He'd fought under your own lord father during the rebellion." Rob frowned and looked to the cell. The prisoners had noticed him and the supposed killer had pulled himself up straight. "Whoever you are, I beg you, see sense. The Tarmeds have imprisoned me under baseless claims," the man yelled. "I am a cousin to Lord Brookbirth, he will not stand for this." If that was true, Rob had just stepped into a truly dangerous situation. The Brookbirths were already baying for blood, and an imprisoned kinsman was more than enough of an excuse. He looked at the knife clutched in his hands. The chances were high that these men were murderers and poachers, which could not be ignored. Rob was duty-bound to see them tried for their crimes, heedless of the current tensions. He was unsure of the steward's motivations. "Open the cell, the prisoners shall be leaving with us," he commanded the Carstark guards. Rob turned to the steward. The man's face was pale. "My lord, what are you doing?" "Go find Lord Harry Rob told Carls, the senior guard. Rob left the dungeons with the prisoners chained between his men. The steward ran after him, upset and afraid. "You cannot do this, Lord Stark. These men were to remain in the dungeon. If you wished them to remain hidden, why did you involve me?" Rob demanded. "You were supposed to inform Lord Harry This was meant as leverage against the Brookbirths." Rob turned down the hallway and caught sight of Harry arrayed with the rest of their men by one of the doors leading to the courtyard. Ignoring the steward, Rob walked up to his foster brother and motioned to the prisoners. "Harry these are Brookbirth men." "Murderers and poachers," Carl said. Harry commented. "The Tarmed are truly bold, to risk open battle like this. Should we take them back to Carhold?" Rob asked. Harry nodded. "Yes, now that they're out of the dungeons I doubt they'll go back quietly. I only wish we could have done this later." "Why?" "The Tarmed and Brookbirth men are still awake, the feast went long tonight." Possibly to give the steward a chance to find you. Harry explained. They are both still in the castle. We must be quick. Our horses are being readied, we'll ride hard for an hour and make camp. Harry informed him. Rob was relieved to hear the plan. He wondered what the steward thought of all this. He checked the faces around him, noticing a lack of grey-haired men. Where's the steward? Rob panicked. A cry echoed through the castle, it was swallowed by the crash of steel and splintering of wood. Rob threw open the nearest door. Across the courtyard the feasting hall doors had been thrown open and men were spilling out with weapons drawn. The chaos only grew and Rob watched as men in both Tamed and Brookbirth colors were killed without mercy. The melee spun out of control. Rob's shoulder was jerked back, Harry dragged him into the circle of guards. Carls and another man were laying on the stone, their backs marred with blood. The prisoners ran past with their stolen weapons. We need to reach the stables. Harry drew his own blade, Rob mimicked him. Their small group went largely unnoticed, but still, in the dark of the night, they were forced to put down a handful of men from both houses. When they finally thundered out the castle gates, the Brookbirthers' encamped forces were streaming in. Rob watched from his saddle as the flames began to peek through the roof of the keep. People were screaming and servants fled in droves. He doubted half the castle staff had made it to safety. Rob! Harry shouted. We must make haste. Off they went, the dark clouds obscuring their trail as they left chaos behind them. Forward slash 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 forward slash. To my Lord Father Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. I have finally returned to Carhold alongside Lord Ricard's army. Reassure Mother that the only injury I bear is a sore knee. Please also convey to Lady Alis that she may rest easy, her brothers and father are likewise in good health. Our siege of Castle Brookbirth lasted a month in total. The experience was very different to the tales written by the Maestas and our ancestors. I suppose that no one found it interesting to extol on 4 weeks of sitting outside the enemy walls, watching and waiting for those inside to grow hungry. At the beginning of the siege, Harry led a small force, including myself, into Tamed lands to restore order. Tamed Tower was a ruin and a group of surviving guards had resorted to banditry, occupying a number of small villages. We tracked them down, slew those who fought back and took the others prisoner. The men who had simply returned to their families in peace were granted pardons. It was quite extraordinary to see a lord muster an army for war, to see the ranks of Northmen arrive under their banners. It was a sight from my imagination when the Carhold heavy cavalry was arrayed in the field. My own armor was a set that Harry had outgrown, it sat awkwardly and I would like to have my own commissioned soon. The siege itself ended when Lord Brookbirth surrendered. As I understand it, he had not anticipated such a violent response. Most of his men were left outside his walls to be captured. I suspect Lord Karstark had tired of the constant hostilities and would brook no more defiance from such weak vassals. Lord Brookbirth and his brother were both beheaded for their act of rebellion and the breaking of guest right, while the rest of their family either took the black or were given into the care of loyal lords. Lord Ricard has decreed both houses are stripped of their titles and holdings, they are noble no more. Their now unruled lands are being given to Lord Ricard's second son, Eddard. He will marry the daughter of the nearest lord and hold the former Castle Brookbirth as his seat. While Eddard appeared confident at the proclamation, he came running to Harry and I later that evening. He was anxious and genuinely worried about his new responsibilities. I am hardly a lord myself, so I left the task of assuaging Eddard to Harry. In truth, a part of my heart tells me I am responsible for this. For the destruction of 2 houses, 2 families. It's entirely possible that had I left the Brookbirth poachers in the Tamed dungeons that night, Harry would have used them as intended, staving off the feud for another few years. It racks my mind to consider those possibilities. Nevertheless, it persists. More so after seeing the state of Tamed Tower. Father, the maids and the serving boys were killed alongside their liege lords, because of my mistake. What is my honor worth when babes and mothers lay dead at my feet? I look forward to your letters, they have helped to reassure me in the past and I need your advice now more than ever. Your loyal son, Rob. Heir to Winterfell and House Stark. forward slash 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 forward slash. Rob had woken early this morning and dressed in one of the finer doublets he'd brought with him. The rest of the family were dressed in similar finery. They were all expected to be presentable, including Lady Alice, who had arrived earlier that week from her year-long stay in Winterfell. Lady Alice's return coincided with the Karstarks' traditional visit to their family crypts. It would be the first time Rob participated in the ceremony. He suspected it was due to the documents Alice had brought with her, which included a copy of their betrothal agreement. Marriage was inevitable for Rob, but he felt no dread over his eventual nuptial. In fact, he had grown genuinely excited at the prospect. Alice was a charming woman who was well liked by his family, especially Sansa. He considered Lord Rickard a mentor and Alice's brothers were close friends. In the same manner that Theon Stark bound the Mormonts to his family through marriage to Prince Carlon, Rob and Alice would reinforce the blood ties between Winterfell and Carhold. The last lady of Winterfell to hail from Karstark stock was, coincidentally, another Alice who had wed Brandon, the fifth son of Cregan. Alice looked striking in the morning light. She waited at the bottom of the keep stairs while Eddard and Torren milled about near the gate. "Are you ready, Rob?" "I am, Alice," he replied. Though Lord Rickard has been somewhat reticent on the details of the ceremony. "All I know is that we'll be visiting your family crypts." Alice smiled, "Not just visiting. Father and Mother will be bringing gifts to place over the tombs." "You do this twice a year?" Rob asked. "Once near the beginning and one close to the end," Alice explained. "Typically, Father will choose a particular ancestor to place our tributes to, but the sentiment is meant for all of them." "Who has he chosen this time?" "I'm unsure. Before I left for Winterfell he chose our great-grandfather, and before that was one of our distant aunts." Their conversation was interrupted by Lady Karstark. "Rob, Alice, come along, we're ready to depart," the lady called out. Accompanied by the most experienced and senior household guards and a small number of sworn swords, made up of cousins and other distant relations, they made their way across the drawbridge and down the hill. Rob chatted with Alice and her mother as they walked around the base of the castle. Their destination was a small walled section built into the hillside underneath the drawbridge. A heavy iron gate, inlaid with bronze, was unlocked and pulled open by pairs of men. Beyond it was a cramped tunnel lined with rough stonework leading to an ironwood door much like the one that guarded Winterfell's own crypt. Rob was shocked when he stepped into the crypt proper. Though there were a few torches lining the chamber, they were unlit. The light that bathed the tombs came from shafts of sunlight. Some kind of channels were dug into the roof. Judging by the angle, they must have led to the hillsides above. Alice took his hand, which ensured he didn't fall too far behind. The tombs of the Karstarks were laid out similarly to the Starks, though it became clear that the lords did not have the statues Rob's own family commissioned. Instead, plates of bronze were laid atop the tombs and bore a likeness and list of titles. He listened intently to Alice as she pointed noteworthy names and faces. They shared a laugh at the number of namesakes she had. Farther and farther they walked into the ancient halls, eventually crossing into what Rob judged to be the oldest tombs. They had the unique look of pre-Andal stonework. The bronze here was remarkably well preserved. At the end of the crypt, and Rob was quite new to the idea of crypts that had a reachable end, had a single stone statue laid into the wall. At its feet was a stone wolf and across its lap, an ancient sword. Above the statue's alcove was a large bronze plate inscribed with the old tongue. Magna Carlon. Ulfiud, Marfithni, Heraleskyl. Sulfur Winter. Carlon Stark. Rob whispered. Yes, Lord Kartuk stood before the statue. The founder of our house, Carlon the Noble, he stated proudly. He has many titles, Rob commented, more to Alice than anyone else. Can you read them? Alice asked. Sansa said you were being taught the old tongue. You cannot. I know some old poetry and a few sayings. I was learning the alphabet from Sansa. Father was taught more, but even he will admit to not be a master of the language. The inscription says Lord Carlon. Wolf son, horse slayer, justice bearer. The light of winter. Rob translated. Wonderful, you'll have to teach me. Of course, my lady. Our children will need to learn one day. it would only be fitting that their mother help them do so. Rob said, though he didn't truly think about his words. They were bold. He snuck a look at Alice to find her staring at him before grinning. Alice and Rob shared happy smiles. Stepping forward, Lord Karstark lifted a bundle from his wife's arms. Inside the cloth was a helmet with the son of Karhold presented proudly upon the face. Rob recognized it as Harry On's old helm. There was a significant dent running along the back of the scalp. Harry On had worn it during the siege. The helm had absorbed a spear thrust from a Brookbirth soldier during the first clashes. Harry On had been on horseback, so the full force of the enemy's thrust lessened. If the strike had been a little lower, the tip would have skewered his throat instead. The helmet was placed reverently upon Karlon's lap, a token of thanks. They watched on silently as a nearby shaft of sunlight shifted across the floor. The other men and women walked forward and arranged their own items at the statue's feet. It took roughly half an hour for the ceremony to end, during which Lord Karstark led his family in silent prayer. Finally, the light climbed up Karlon's shins and found a resting place upon the helmet and sword, giving both items an ethereal glow that awed Rob. The sun indeed. // /n, time for some time skips. I'll be taking a peek at most of the Stark children and show some stuff from the time during the fosterings. As for timeline purposes, the ages have been slightly tuned. For those wondering about the year, Bourne met Lord Stark in 294 AC, and the Starks left for their fostering in 295 AC. In canon, King Robert will be arriving at Winterfell in 298 AC. Thanks for all your support. Next chapter we'll be returning to Winterfell to see Sansa. Chapter 14, Autumn Growth. Chapter text. For the first time she could remember, Sansa wondered if there was such a thing as having too much fun. Fun wasn't truly the right word. As the eldest daughter of Lord Stark, Sansa was expected to ensure any guests in Winterfell were properly taken care of and entertained. Alis, Edara, Omer Umber and the recently arrived Mandaeli sisters, made up the 6 women that Sansa was ostensibly in charge of. It was difficult to be serious when her charges were the same age or older than her. The weeks passed with hours of laughing and learning. Days spent running around the castle or cozying up in one of the rooms. Conversations became chances to learn more about each other and naturally friendships formed. Alis and Sansa became the closest of friends, sharing their dreams and fears under the cover of night. Edara was surprised to find Jane Poole a constant companion, and the steward's daughter was strongly attached to the confident and competent girl. Wyler and Winifred were the oldest of their group. The sisters had polite personalities embedded with a streak of meanness that struck a chord with Arya. Just when they all had settled into a normal schedule, things shifted. Bran and Jon departed for White Harbor. Rob and Arya took their leave next. Their absences were noticeable, and it shocked Sansa how much she missed them. The gaps in her life were set to be filled with the arrival of 2 matrons from Karhold and Torrens Square. Looking back, the matrons were likely the last push for Septa Mordane. The Septa had been, for all intents and purposes, abandoned by Septon Chael. The young man had departed for an extended visit to White Harbor. According to Lord Stark, Chael had requested leave to perform a re-examination of his faith. The rumors in Wintertown said that Chael was sweet on old Toven's daughter, but the two had kept their distance from each other. Bourne's arrival had drawn more than one maiden's attention. When old Toven and his daughter started keeping to the Godswood over the September, Chael started spending his time in town. The castle staff were betting odds on whether Chael would come back short a 7-point necklace and gain himself a wife. With the September temporarily closed to anyone but the Starks and Mordane, the Septa must have felt desperate. It all culminated when Lady Stark discovered Mordane rifling through Maester Lewin's correspondence during an evening meal. She intended to sneak a letter to the High Septon in Old Town, which contained a furious rant about wilderling heathens entrancing Lord and Lady Stark with tree magic, making blood sacrifices to wolf demons, and a fictitious account of Bourne encouraging Lord Stark to march burnt the only September in the north. Sansa could hardly believe it. The Septa may have been rude at times, but she had encouraged Sansa's talents and complimented her often. It shocked Sansa to see her former teacher ranting and raving about corrupting trees and the damnation of House Stark's souls. Lord Stark barred Mordain from the castle and arranged for an escort to see the women to White Harbor. Winifred and Wyler gossiped later that from White Harbor, their father had been instructed to send the holy women off to a coven of silent sisters the Marndaelists sponsored in the Vale. Sansa could only hope that Mordain would find it a more peaceful life. Obviously the southerner just wasn't cut out for the northern climate. Forward slash 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 forward slash. The matrons were a breath of fresh air for Sansa. Whereas Septa Mordain got her teachings from either Lady Stark or straight from one of her holy texts, the matrons drew upon both years of tradition, their own memories, and careful consultations with both Lady Stark and Old Nan. While the types of subjects, dancing, singing, instrument playing, remained much the same, the other parts of her education radically changed. Where Mordain dismissed extensive accounting, studying of trading and techniques for supply management as steward's work, it could very well fall under a northern lady's purview. Especially for girls of lower status like Eddara, or younger daughters like Arya, who may be married to a house with less wealthy households. Also, the matrons insisted on the girls spending at least some time every week outside, weather permitting. The air and the rush of blood was good for their health. Eddara's matron even offered to teach the girls archery to pass the time. The lack of instruction in the Seven left time for Sansa's new favorite pastime, poetry and song. Sansa dove into learning the old tongue with vigor once her father presented her with a collection of songs and poems written down by a Stark queen. She outright laughed when Arya learned that even in the old days there were still ladies. The tales of sword maidens were restricted to accounts of women trained when plague or war had taken nearly all of the men, or from places like Bear Island where every sword counted. Inspired, Sansa has taken to composing her own works. At first, she based them on the stories Born has been teaching. Slowly she branched out to the tales Old Nan repeated when watching Rukun. At the end of the year, Alis announced her intention to return home, while Marndaeli said the same, though her elder sister Winifred would remain. It was at their farewell dinner that Sansa decided to perform 2 original pieces. The March of the Noble Sun depicted Carlon Stark marching from Winterfell to Barrowtown, then into the heart of the Rylls. Sansa dramatized the final battle of the rebellion, which was in fact a siege, as a charge by the noble wolf prince down a hill with the sun behind him, blinding the cavalry of the riders and allowing him to destroy the enemy. Sansa's nerves washed away when her poem received raucous cheers from all the men and women in the hall, especially the Karstark men. Emboldened, she moved on to her first song. The Knight of the White Knife was based loosely on an older legend about a traveling warrior banished from the Riverlands. He ventured up the coast of the north. The unnamed warrior fought a cruel chieftain for the right to rule the White Knife. Sansa changed it to be a shipwrecked knight from Andalos who was nursed back to health by a local noblewoman bound to a cruel king. When the king came to take the woman's wealth and force her into marriage, the knight leapt to her defense and fought a duel knee-deep in the river. He slew the king and took the lady as his wife. Sansa's parents gave her a standing ovation and she received dozens of compliments throughout the evening. The Marndaeli sisters even embraced her and appeared genuinely flattered. They begged for a copy of the lyrics and tune to send home. It was a pleasant end to their visit and Sansa watched them leave the next day. She made sure to give Alis an especially tight hug and reminded her that Robb particularly enjoyed the color blue. Her future good sister blushed and they shared a heartfelt goodbye. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Any messages, Maester Lewin? Nothing that requires your attention, Lady Sansa. Lewin looked up from his desk and smiled at the young woman. Is there anything I can help you with, my lady? No news of father then? Sansa looked down at her hands. Lewin stood up and led Lady Sansa out of his study. Lord Stark is no green boy. He will return safe and sound. I recall Sir Roderick telling Bran that even the most skilled warrior can fall prey to bad luck. Sansa retorted. That means that even common bandits may win a battle. Lord Stark is a wise man. By now he should have reached Torrens Square. With Lord Tallheart at his side, these bandits will not last long. Lewin concluded. Do you think the guards are right? The bandits were sent north by Lord Lannister. Sansa asked. Lewin shook his head. Pay no mind to gossip, Lady Sansa. Lord Lannister gains nothing by sending criminals to pillage the Stony Shore. His reputation alone would have pushed these brigands out of the Westerlands. They chatted back and forth as they travelled through the keep. They stopped outside Lady Stark's chambers. Sansa took a moment to force a smile onto her face before she entered. Mother, she called. It's morning. Lady Catelyn was buried under piles of furs and blankets. Her room wasn't quite sweltering, but the large pile of wood and kindling kept the fireplace in constant use. Sansa gathered a plate of food from the table and Lewin kneeled at the lady's side. Unfortunately, her health had not improved, but by the grace of the gods it had not worsened. Her fever burned low, but uninterrupted, and her stomach would accept only liquids and small amounts of bread. Lewin feared her weight loss more than her sweats. He stood back as Sansa fed her mother. The young woman had impressed everyone in Winterfell. When it became clear that Lady Stark would not be recovering anytime soon and that Lord Stark could not return, in the absence of Robb, Sansa had stepped into the role of managing the household. With plenty of help from the servants and her friends, of course. Lewin thought they were fortunate that the last of the guests had left the month before. He shuddered to think of Domeric Bolton or the Mountain Clan heirs witnessing such a moment of weakness. Bidding Lady Stark goodbye, Sansa promised a maid would be by to help her bathe later. With her routine started, Sansa thoughtlessly made a visit to the kitchens to check on the larder. Steward Poole was confident that their stores were healthy and there would be no risk of running out, but Sansa needed to reassure herself. With so many of the men-at-arms accompanying her father, Winterfell was lacking in manpower for hunting if something were to go wrong. She exited the main keep, her steps drew toward Godswood. Lady couldn't contain her excitement and bounded ahead, no doubt searching for Rickon and his wolf, Shaggy, for a spot of play. Her youngest brother was found sitting in old Nan's lap, twisting twigs into little figures, chatting away to the shepherd. Green Eyes was content grooming Lady and Shaggy. "How are you, Lady Sansa?" old Nan called out. "Well enough, Nan," Sansa replied. "I actually wished to speak with you." "About the herbs?" she asked. "The Flint told me they should be arriving within the week." His message would have arrived before they returned home. Sansa sighed in relief. Good. She gave Rickon a quick kiss and left to attend her next task. Edara and Jane kept to her side for the rest of the day. Letters needed to be written and ledgers updated. Steward Poole and Maester Lewin could hardly cover both her father's work and her mother's. Eating dinner in the solar next to her mother was easier than waiting for the hall to be set up. Edara and Jane did their best to lighten her mood with jokes and gossip. It often helped ease the stress in her shoulders as the sun set. "Sansa." Edara shook her shoulder. "I'm sorry. I was daydreaming." Edara frowned. "Do you want to take a walk? There's still some daylight out." Sansa looked down to Lady, who was already up and pacing to the door. "A sign if there ever was one." "That's a good idea. Would you make sure Jane gets to bed?" She left her friends behind and informed Sir Roderick on her way out of the keep. He insisted on walking with her to the Godswood entrance and even cajoled old Nan into waiting for her. Surprisingly, Lady and Green Eyes stayed with old Nan. Bathed in warm light, the weirwoods glowed with orange and red, deep colors that lightened the shadows. The Hartree's face has a gentle angle to it. Sansa had spoken to Jon about it once. She asked him why he preferred praying after sundown, or the few times when the moon rose high. He'd spoken of how the moonlight shifted the great Hartree to appear like a statue. Its bark appeared stone grey, the whole grove enveloped in a blanket of darkness. Jon was so caught up in his description he let slip how the night comforted him, it welcomed him without expectation or preconception. Her half-brother had blushed and stammered an excuse. He was embarrassed at the comment and Sansa let him leave with his dignity intact. Rather than thinking less of Jon, she'd never felt closer to him in that moment. The warmth of the Godswood and the carved smile reassured Sansa, gave her strength when she doubted herself. Sitting with her small satchel of writing supplies, she let herself breathe. Father would return when the bandit group was dealt with. Mother would recover soon, the herbs from the mountain clans were on their way. She repeated quietly to herself, With every passing second she felt calmer, more at peace. Her eyes were unfocused, the light and leaves drifted slowly in front of her. Thoughts of her parents and responsibilities fell away, unbidden her mind meandered from one memory to another. The leaves on the ground were swept away by a slight breeze, a single leaf, darker than the rest, flew one way and the rest another. A lone wolf. Separated from the pack in a great storm. Sangza likely never noticed her hand gripping a stylus and sweeping across the tablet in her lap. She found herself stranded in the south. The winter winds echoed across the land but could not reach her. Thick brambles of words and wishes blocked her way. Thorns of gold, thorns of black, thorns of green cut her fur, bled her flesh. Their poison weakened her, starved her. They made her weak and vulnerable. She was too young to be able to protect herself, forced to wander alone. The runes were neat and clear as they covered the page. First, a lioness hunted her. With no pack, the predator tore at her throat, leaving the wolf alive within her jaws. Unable to escape without fearing the snapping of the jaw. A flock of birds seemed to come to her rescue. It tricked the lioness into releasing the wolf and lifted her away. Sangza never felt the tears dry on her cheeks. The mountains of the flock were treacherous and cruel. The wolf grew wings and pretended to be a bird, for her saviors were greedy and selfish, they didn't want a wolf. It wasn't until the echoes of the winter winds found her, carrying the howl of her pack, that the wolf woke from that terrible deception. The wolf ripped apart the birds and leaped from the mountain tops. Her false wings carried her over the bramble, which was now alight with fire and ash. She sat down among the snow drifts of her home and she tore her own wings to shreds. The wind howled, the trees shook, the heart-tree bled. Though the wolf had feared the north would reject her, would scent the summer and spring that had been mixed with her blood, would look upon the scars along her back, and turn away. She was wrong. The pack enveloped her, the wind called to her. Winter embraced her. The gods would settled. Sangza gave a silent prayer and looked down at the song she had composed. It felt good to see the runes, to see the pain of the lone wolf put into word. It was liberating. Sangza took her leave, bid old Nan a good night, and slept soundly that night. // For another 2 weeks Sangza did her best to keep Winterfell running smoothly. Her age and lack of experience didn't stop her from keeping the castle's morale up, or visiting Wintertown with Sir Roderick and Jory Castle to reassure the small folk. A messenger from the First Flints arrived with bundles of herbs that old Nan believed could help Lady Catelyn. The fever abated and the cough drained away. Day by day Catelyn recovered. It was to Sangza's great relief that her mother was finally well enough to join the household for a meal in the hall. To her own surprise, Sangza didn't fade back into her old role. From then on, if Lady Stark was unavailable, the castle staff wouldn't hesitate to seek her out instead. Edara and Jane insisted that she now had a glowing reputation among the small folk. All of that change was dwarfed by her father's return. He accepted her tight hug with grace and kissed her forehead. He likely had no hint of how much his presence comforted her. Though Lord Stark had been gone a mere month, his daughter had undergone her own challenges and exceeded any expectations. Her maturity must have shown through somehow, because the next night both her parents invited her to a private dinner. They took Sangza's hands in their own and asked her opinion on a betrothal, between herself and Small Janumber. Life was moving fast, and just because Sangza's siblings had gone off to the far corners of the north, didn't mean Sangza was being left behind. // A /N, I am still going back and forth on marriages for the Stark kids. Next up we have Arya, who has gone off to the Glovers. Thanks again for the comments and feedback. Chapter 15, Here the Bear Stands, Part 1. Summary. Part 1 of Arya's fostering. Chapter text. Deepwood Motte was pretty great, maybe even as great as Winterfell. Arya decided she was going to get her father a great present the next time she saw him. She pushed away the homesickness attached to that thought. It hadn't set in until the 4th or 5th night on the road, just what leaving to Foster meant. No more mornings playing with Rickon and Bran, No sneaking around to watch Rob and John spar, no more lessons with Bourne, no evenings with Sansa and Mother. She did her best to hide her tears, and the maid's father sent to escort her were kind enough to not mention them. When Deepwood Motte finally came into view, Arya was no longer sad or mopey, she was just bone-tired. The castle was old and definitely looked frail in comparison to the massive walls of Winterfell. Its long hall sat on a hill with a flattened top, along with a watchtower. One of the guards claimed it was the tallest building this side of the northern mountains. Arya decided she'd ask to see the top of it. Bran would love to hear about the view. Below the hill was a bailey packed with the stables, paddock, smithy, well, and a sheep pen. It was all surrounded by a large spiked wall. Deepwood's outer walls were covered in moss and flanked by 2 square towers. Arya wondered if this was how Winterfell looked centuries ago, when all that stood was the first keep and the broken tower. Her introduction to the Glovers went smoothly enough. Her parents instilled a serious warning that her conduct was going to reflect on her family. Normally Arya made a point of ignoring the rules if she thought they were dumb. Acting a different way just to get on someone's good side was a lot like lying. Then Jon pointed out that Arya was polite to Eddara and Aelys. In return, they were nice to her. He had a way of making things sensible. With that in mind, Arya curtsied and made sure to address the Glovers properly and by name. That had taken some time to memorize. If she hadn't prepared ahead of their arrival, she definitely would have said something improper. Lord Galbart Glover didn't have a wife or kids, which meant that Lady Sybil, Robert Glover's wife, acted as the lady of the castle. That couldn't have been easy, what with Sybil being pregnant. Lady Sybil was kind enough to answer Arya's questions about the baby. She'd been a lot smaller when her mother had been pregnant with Rickon. On the topic of family, it was during her first dinner with the Glovers that Arya learned they had closer ties than she knew. // Arya finished eating her soup, making sure not a single drop spilled onto her dress. How was your journey, Lady Arya? Lady Sybil asked. The older woman had fair skin and long hair, which was very similar to Arya's own dark brown coloring. It was long, but I saw a lot of really amazing sights. I've never been this far in the Wolf's Wood. I've never even seen the ocean. Arya explained. Lady Sybil laughed. We'll have to fix that. I'm sure we can arrange a trip to one of the fishing villages on the coast. The waters may be cold, but they are a sight to see. Sitting beside Lady Sybil was another brunette, Andra Locke, Sybil's younger sister. Andra was acting as a handmaiden to Sybil and a nanny for Robert and Sybil's son, Goran. Is Old Castle near the ocean, Lady Andra? Arya asked. It is, Andra said. The castle itself overlooks the Bight. On clear days you can see all the way out to the Three Sisters. It sounds beautiful. Andra smiled at her. I'm sure you'd be welcome to visit. You have some Locke blood in you after all. Arya blinked. What do you mean? From what I remember, your great-great-grandmother was Marna Locke. The rest of their meal was spent talking about Old Castle and House Locke, a family that Arya had rarely heard of. Lady Sybil, I was wondering if I could meet Deepwood Motte's shepherd. Oh, I'm sorry, Arya. We don't have a shepherd here at Deepwood. Arya frowned. Then who tends to the Godswood? Every few weeks 1 or 2 from Bear Island visit. I'm sure they'd be willing to speak with you. Sybil replied. Is there a reason there's none here? Arya asked. The adults at the table frowned and Lord Galbart coughed to draw Arya's attention. The family of shepherds who tended to Deepwood perished in an Ironborn raid many years ago, he said. Arya picked up on the somber mood and quickly moved on to a different topic. In her desperation, she started talking to Goran. The boy was 2 years younger than Arya and didn't seem to have a problem hanging out with girls like Bran sometimes did. He'd been following her around since her arrival. He was kind of annoying, but there weren't many other kids at Deepwood. The rest of her night and the next week was awkward for Arya. She spent most of it exploring Deepwood with Goran right on her heels. Unlike Winterfell, the stable hands and most of the castle staff were all older than her, the youngest were closer to Rob's age. Once she was settled into the castle and had unpacked her new room, she got up the courage to pull out her most prized possession. A small dagger. The sheath was wrapped in plain grey cloth, dangling from the simple pommel was a small amal. Both were gifts from John. He'd taken her down to the crypts a few days before he left for White Harbour. She'd cried into his chest and demanded, again, to know why he had to leave. John had only told her he was going to see more of the north. Looking back, Arya shouldn't have taken so much joy when he revealed that he didn't want to stay at Winterfell without her. It was comforting that her brother needed her as much as she needed him. John promised that the next time they met he'd have a dozen stories, a set of armor, and gifts for her. She supposed that was worth the wait. Deepwood quickly turned into a busy place to be. Andra was acting as her matron. She was loads more fun than Septa Mordain. Arya wasn't yelled at, and if she didn't do a great job, then Andra took the time to fix it. She acted a lot more like mother or father when they taught her. Even with better instructors, it became clear that Arya was no great seamstress, but she got a handle on the basics pretty quickly. She even started helping Lady Sybil and the other maids weave and stitch for the household. Without a shepherd around, learning the old tongue was put on hold. Lord Glover and Lady Sybil didn't have the time, and Andra had only ever learned the basics. When her mind wandered during work and lessons, Arya would dream about her future. Though everyone else denied it, Arya felt she just wasn't suited to being a noble lady. That opinion used to stem from Mordain and Sansa's harsh words. Reading stories in Father's lap about ancient Stark queens who were described as plain had comforted her, even when Father insisted she'd change as she grew. Now her inadequacy stemmed from the fact that she didn't even possess the talents her ancestors had. She wasn't graceful, she wasn't a genius of sums, and she didn't possess the patience to master an art or craft. In her fantasies, Arya was a sailor on the narrow sea. She sailed to Bravos, fought pirates, and brought back treasures by the chest-load. Yes, that would be great, and then people would write her name down in their books. Lady Arya, the navigator, the sea wolf. They'd remember her like Queen Lyra and Queen Brehis. Arya would make sure of it. // Lady Arya. Lady Arya. Arya froze. Looking around the trunk of a massive oak tree, she listened for another call. Lady Arya. It was Andra. Jumping back, Arya hurriedly picked up the scarecrow stuck into the ground and shoved it into the hollow underneath the oak roots. Almost forgetting to pull out her dagger first. Secured it in its sheath, she hid the weapon under the folds of her dress. She brushed off any stray clumps of dirt and wiped away her sweat. I'm here, Andra. Arya jogged out of the tree line. It had been half a year since Arya's arrival at Deepwood. Once she gathered the courage to start practicing with her dagger, she found a secluded part of the Godswood that was far enough away from the main keep but still within the walls. Andra and Lady Sybil knew she went to the Godswood sometimes. They probably thought she was praying, which she sometimes did, or writing letters to her family, which she finished earlier that morning. There you are. Come along, Lord Glover says that the Mormonts are arriving soon. Andra explained. She took a moment to adjust Arya's sleeves. Is Lady Mage coming? Arya wondered. I believe so. Though I wouldn't be surprised if her heir, Daisy, was accompanying her. Why is Lady Mage the head of her house? Doesn't she have a husband? Or a brother? Arya prodded. She could only remember Mayor Stillowin saying that the head of House Mormont was Lord Gia. Andra grimaced. Her nephew, Jorah, was the Lord of Bear Island until it was found he had broken some very important laws. When Lord Stark went to bring him to justice, he fled into exile. Now Lady Mage has stepped forward to fill that role. Arya made a note to add another page to her message home. What kind of crime was bad enough that her father would go personally? Her eyes were drawn to the heartree of Deepwood. A large weirwood, similar to Winterfell's. The face carved there appeared to be grimacing in pain, with one eye carved rougher than the other, mimicking a battle wound. Underneath its mouth, the sunlight was glinting off the most unusual aspect of Deepwood moat. Set into the trunk was an ancient skeletal arm. From the wrist up, the bones were coated in dulled silver that had flecked off with age. Goran had shown it to her during her first time praying in Deepwood. When she'd gone to touch it, Goran tackled her away. He apologized, but took the time to explain that it belonged to the first Glover king, from before the long night. Arya learned that the ancient Glovers used to dip their hands in silver to stop the children of the forest from enchanting them. Born told her the first men walked with the children for generations. It wasn't until they made the pact that the hostility faded. Arya wondered if that was when the Glovers stopped, well, gloving themselves. The Mormonts are House Glover's friends, right? Arya questioned, thinking back to old lessons. Andra nodded. For many centuries. The two houses have often allied to fight off the Ironborn, and given aid in dire times. It upset Lord Glover immensely when Jorah Mormont was exiled. Inviting Lady Mage here is a way to show House Glover still trusts them. They entered the castle proper, swept up by the staff as last-minute preparations were finished. An hour later, Arya stood in the courtyard alongside Goran. She checked over her shoulder quickly to make sure Birina had stayed in the kennels. Normally, Arya would have let her wolf run free, but Birina tended to get excited when she met new people. Her direwolf was firmly out of the puppy stage and could knock over grown men if they weren't prepared for her. With the blow of a horn, a group bearing bear banners walked up to Deepwood's doors. Leading the party was a trio of men-at-arms in well-worn armor. Behind them, amidst the rest of the escorts, was a group of women. The oldest woman was presumably Mage Mormont. She was a short, stout, grey-haired woman, dressed in her own set of battle leathers with ringmail peeking out from the collar. Arya was drawn to the wickedly spiked mace that hung from her belt. Towering over her was another woman. They shared enough features that Arya guessed this was Daisy Mormont. She was at least 6 feet tall, lanky with long features. Maybe those were from her father. At their heels were 2 more girls, closer to Arya's age. Their introductions were curt, but Lord Glover embraced Lady Mage with a gentle hug. Daisy introduced her younger sisters, Jarell and Lyra. She informed Lady Sybil that their other sister Alysanne had remained behind at Bear Island with her own children and Mage's youngest daughter, Lyanna. Arya was tempted to ask if there was some kind of magic on Bear Island that made everyone have daughters. She couldn't imagine having so many sisters and aunts. Any doubts or thoughts Arya had were discarded after an hour with the Mormonts. They were just so interesting. Their stories were great and Jarell and Lyra were hilarious. Lady Mage even allowed Birina to rest in her lap by the fire. A fine name, she'd said. Arya wondered if Lady Mage was what a grandmother would have been like. The next day she and Goran gave the girls a tour. That evening Andra had to drag Arya away from the yard where Daisy and the Mormont guards were training. Unfortunately, it wasn't all winter sunlight. Jarell and Lyra liked to play in the Godswood, but, much to Arya's frustration, they also liked to spend time inside sewing or singing. When Arya opened up about her dreams of the sea, they didn't understand. Daisy didn't approve either. She indulged Arya, but made it clear that some dreams must be tempered by reality. Days later, Arya got into another argument with Lyra. It was so bad that Arya ran off with tears streaking down her face. She was so upset she didn't notice the massive thunderclouds roll in from the west until it was too late. // Don't worry, Birina. We'll be back inside soon. I'm pretty sure Deepwood is this way. Arya reassured her wolf. The pair were soaked through. The rain had come out of nowhere and the forest floor was already filled with puddles. The wind and clouds only made navigating the woods worse. Arya could barely see and it was hard to think. Birina had stopped her from tripping more than once. Jumping over a pile of roots, Arya slipped on the mud and fell sideways. Rather than the ground, her arm slammed into something hard beside her. After steadying herself, Arya looked at the strange tree she hit, only to realize it wasn't a tree at all. It's a wall, Birina. Following the old brickwork, Arya was amazed to find an ancient keep. The structures were covered in mud and vines. In the downpour, she could barely make out the layout of the ruins. There might have been a few wooden buildings reduced to foundations, a tower with a doorway left standing, and what might have been a moat was just a slight dip in the ground. Deeper into the ruins was a massive tree growing through a knocked-down wall, forming a canopy. Finally, Arya sighed. The two ran over and plopped down in the relatively dry dirt. Arya did her best to dry off Birina, with little effect. She decided that rather than stumbling through the forest, she'd wait out the storm and walk back later. That plan lasted all of an hour. Birina snapped up onto all fours. Arya stopped herself from chiding the wolf when she felt Birina's heartbeat in the back of her mind. It was racing, thudding in her chest. Her muscles were tensed. Behind the sound of the storm, she heard the scrape of claws on the bark and the air had a faint whiff of a large group. In a burst of noise, they were surrounded. Backed into the corner by a group of wolves. They were smaller than her. She could rip them apart normally, but she wasn't alone and there were at least a dozen of them. The rain had masked their approach, letting their pack back her into a corner. When their hunters caught sight of her, they hesitated. Even outnumbered, she was an intimidating sight. Hopefully, a knife could protect her other half while she fought them off. Tired of waiting, she lunged forward, catching the pack leader off guard. The lead wolf's throat was broken before it could react. Two others tackled her. She threw one off her back and opened the other's belly. Whirling around, she caught the remaining wolf midair, latching around its leg. She slammed it into the ground, feeling its back break. The rest swarmed her and she lost herself in the claws and bites. Out of her eye, she saw her other half pressed up against the earth, a wolf bleeding out across her chest. The knife was buried to the hilt in the animal's chest. She was screaming, she was howling, and the rain thundered on. Another two wolves fell dead and the rest, now that half their original number, retreated. They've been cowed or killed. Their ambush ended in a massacre. Arya felt her heartbeat slow down. The cool rainwater spilled down her face, washing away the streaks of mud and blood. The wolf corpse was dragged off her chest, finally letting her breathe. She sat up, holding her arm gingerly. Most of the sleeve had been torn away by the wolf's jaws. She didn't want to look at it. "You were great, Birina." Her wolf came up beside her, allowing Arya to shift her weight on her. Birina had her own fair share of wounds. They took a few steps together before Arya collapsed, Birina laying beside her. She was just so tired. Birina began growling. Arya kept her eyes open long enough to look up and see a huge bear looming over them. She almost screamed when it reached down. Instead of clawing her to pieces, two hands carefully lifted her and Birina up. The bear's face had two very human eyes, and a beard, and a nose. Maybe it was a magical bear. "Yurkanif?" Arya asked. Her body was throbbing, her words came out in the old tongue. She thought she asked for the bear's name. That was silly, bears didn't have names. The bear raised its eyebrows. Not a very bear-like expression. "Harad," it replied in a rumbling voice. It was a nice voice, combined with its warm fur. Arya fell asleep, wondering whether this bear had a woman for a mother. // Chapter 16, Here the Bear Stands, Part 2. Chapter text. Arya woke up wrapped tight inside a mass of blankets with Birina draped across the mattress, her arms immobilized. She noticed Jarell and Lyra cuddled up tight beside them. Her two friends were sound asleep even after Arya wiggled out of the covers. She laughed when they transferred their grips to Birina instead. Lady Mage came by not long after and escorted her down to the hall for something to eat. She could hear the thunder outside, the storm was still going. She'd been asleep for over a day but was in good health. Lady Sybil delivered a lengthy talking to, including a laundry list of punishments to make up for her disappearance. Arya wouldn't be going out into the woods anytime soon. "Who found me, Lady Sybil? I was so exhausted that I imagined a bear saved me." Lady Mage laughed. "I guess from a certain point of view, you were saved by a bear." "What do you mean?" Lady Mage only pointed towards the door slowly opening into the hall. A bear's head leaned out around the door frame. Arya fell out of her chair with a yell. Without thinking, she rushed to Lady Sybil and hid by her arm. The door opened fully and instead of a furry body, a man walked in. He was enormous, at least as big as Great Jon Umber but shorter than the Umberlord or Walder back home. He had a massive mane of deep brown hair that was tied into a long braid going down his back. The bear head that had given Arya such a fright, was a bear fur cape clasped over his shoulder. He had a muddy complexion with a squat nose and wide jaw. Seeing no one else being alarmed, Arya relaxed. The newcomer stopped before the table and bowed to Lady Mage and Lady Sybil. "My ladies," he softly greeted. It was the same voice that Arya heard in the forest. Arya jumped up and ran towards him. He smiled down at her. "Did you save me and Birina?" she asked. "I did, Lady Stark," he responded. Suddenly reminded of her manners, Arya dipped into a proper bow, just like how Andra had taught her. "On behalf of House Stark, I thank you for your aid." Rather than laugh at her, the bear man bowed back. "Your gratitude is appreciated, Lady Stark." Arya paused and took a breath. "Is your name Harrod?" "Indeed. So it wasn't all a dream. Come, there's some food left for you," Lady Mage said. Everyone sat back down and the meal continued. Arya tried to subtly get a longer look at Harrod. He'd taken off his cape and cloak to eat. He wore rough spun pants with a fur-lined jacket. What caught her eye was a thick leather cord wrapped around his massive wrist. It was threaded with teeth and claws from different animals. It looked very familiar. Arya gasped loudly, "You're a shepherd." Lady Mage leaned forward, allowing Harrod to eat uninterrupted. "Harrod lives on Bear Island. Is he House Mormont's shepherd?" Arya wondered. Mage shook her head. "No, there's a good 24 shepherds that have lived on Bear Island for many years. Harrod and a few others make regular visits to Deepwood." "Will you be staying long?" Arya asked Harrod. The shepherd finished his broth before answering. "I actually came to deliver a message to Lady Mormont. I was planning on returning at the end of the week." Arya tried to hide her disappointment. "Was there something you needed Harrod's help with, Arya?" Arya hesitated. "Sorry, Lady Sybil. I don't want to take up his time, it's just that Bourne was teaching me the old tongue. I promised my father that the next time I saw him we'd be able to have a whole conversation without using Andal," she admitted. "Bourne?" Harrod asked. "Bourne, son of Wolf Tongue." Arya smiled. "You know Bourne?" Harrod nodded. "He was a close friend of mine for many years." "He's at Winterfell?" "Yes. He showed up with green eyes while she was pregnant and helped her give birth to the litter in our Godswood," Arya explained. "When I heard that Bourne had gone beyond the wall, I feared it would be the last I saw of him. I'll have to get a message to him." As Arya and Harrod shared stories about Bourne, something stuck out to her. "If you're not the Mormont shepherd, then why did you bring a message to Lady Mage?" "Because the man turns into a loyal hound whenever my sister calls," Daisy commented as she walked into the hall. "Your sister Alysanne?" Arya clarified. Daisy took a seat beside her mother. Harrod didn't look insulted by Daisy's jibe, more resigned. Kind of like how father looked when Arya and Sansa got into a disagreement. All she has to do is stick her head out the hall door and Harrod will drop everything. Arya wrinkled her nose. "Are you trying to marry Alysanne?" That question had Mage and Daisy roaring with laughter and caused Harrod to blush, though it was hidden by his cup. Daisy leaned forward, grinning madly. "The poor man already tried that, little Arya. My sister is too much a Mormont to let herself become a bride. She didn't want to become a crone though." The Mormont heiress winked, much to Arya's confusion. Alysanne Mormont had 2 children. Arya knew the old stories. "Mormonts are fathered by bears," she muttered. Her eyes jumped back to Harrod. "You're their father," she declared, prompting another round of laughs. It was a pleasant night. Arya's accusations were proven true when Jarell and Lyra arrived and whispered stories of a bear man trying and failing to sneak out of Bear Hall early in the mornings. In that warm hall, surrounded by her friends, Arya couldn't stop herself from feeling strange. For the first time in months she didn't miss Winterfell one bit. // Time washed by like the current of the ocean. 2 months later Arya was taking her first trip to Bear Island alongside Robert Glover. Bear Hall was a warm welcoming place and the Mormonts accepted her with open arms. Daisy and Alysanne took the time to train her in archery and with her dagger. Arya learned quickly that she didn't have the size or the strength to win, so her speed was the only thing she could rely on. If it came down to Arya and someone else, the first move was her best chance. Hunting and hiking became Arya's favorite pastimes, and the rest of her year was spent at Deepwood with the occasional visit to the Mormonts. It was on the return from one of these trips when Madge and Arya got to talking about her family back in Winterfell. "My mother sent me a letter. Have you heard about the trouble in the Stony Shore?" Arya asked. "The bandits?" "Yes. House Ryswell has a constant watch on their border," Madge replied. Arya looked over the edge of their boat, watching the river water run over the rocks. "Is it true there's over 500 of them? The fishermen say a whole army sailed from near Bane Fort." Madge laid a hand on Arya's arm. "Rumors can be more wild than a stallion. From what I understand, at most it's a few dozen brigands. Men like that can only last so long. There's nothing to worry about." Soon enough Arya was back in her room at Deepwood, alone. Birina had taken to spending more and more time out in the Wolf's Wood. Birina wasn't just traipsing around in the wilds alone. Arya had seen other wolves in her dreams. The most she could figure was they were the pack that moved in after Birina defeated those dogs on that stormy night. Arya yawned, blew out her candle, and huddled under her furs. Instead of slipping into darkness, Arya sank into the heartbeat. The trees weren't thick, but she could hear the panting of her pack behind her. She'd been drawn out of their deeper haunts because of the noise. It was too dark for the hunters, and the screams weren't from any prey. It was the human homes on the edge of the wood. They were aflame. Shapes moved frantically through the ash. Blood was heavy in the air. People were running towards her, a group of them. Women and the children, like her and mother and brothers back home. Arya came back to herself with a cough, her lung felt scalded. She stumbled out into the corridor and ran through the halls. After sundown the keep was quiet, and Arya desperately searched for anyone. Finally, she threw the doors of the hall open. "Arya." Mage Mormont sat by the fire with Lord Galbart, goblet in hand. "There's an attack. On the village to the south, the one by Shaleshore." Arya spat out. Mage kneeled before Arya and took her by the arms. "You're not making sense, girl." Arya took a deep breath. "The village east of Saleshore is under attack, it's on fire, people are dying." Lord Galbart joined the two. "Did you have a nightmare, Lady Arya?" She shook off Mage's hands. "It was real. Birina is watching it happen." The doubt was clear on both adults' faces. Arya thought desperately of a way to prove it, to get help before it was too late. She ignored Mage and Galbart's questions and focused on the heartbeat in her soul. She was vaguely aware of Mage swearing. The women and children finally reached the tree line but had stopped to help their wounded catch up. They hadn't been fast enough. There were dangerous men following them, covered in blood not their own. She growled, catching the attention of the villagers. Her muscles tensed and she burst forward, pack in tow. The enemy wasn't expecting them, and her first leap knocked the leader down. He was lightly armored and his throat was unprotected. The other murderers were similarly shocked and fell quickly. Arya came back to the hall to find herself laid on a bench. Her vision was bleeding between light and shadows. Her tongue felt heavy and pungent. "Arya, Arya dear." Mage soothed. "We're assembling a party, Lord Galbart will lead it personally." "Good, but there are people," Arya whispered, "people who need help." She sank back into Birina. The women were frightened. They'd put the children behind them to protect them from the attack. She tread forward slowly with her jaw closed and eyes down. The bravest woman clutched a small knife in her hand. She motioned with her head towards the woods, to the north. The people spoke frantically among each other. The only word she understood was stark. With a bow, the brave woman followed the pack into the woods away from the massacre. Arya lost track of the journey through the woods. They cut across the smoothest terrain. Their path rejoined the rough road leading to Deepwood. It also brought them into contact with a party of armed riders bearing Glover colors. She took her pack back into the woods as the women and children were corralled and taken to safety. Her heart slowed and split apart. Arya didn't even wake up back in the keep. She faded straight from Birina's body into a deep slumber. The story was all over the castle grounds for the next day. The guards drove off the bandits, killing some, but many escaped into the night. A message had been sent to Winterfell. The young Lady Stark was also the talk of the kitchens and stables. She'd been unusually quiet and not even the young Lord Goran could rouse her to troublemaking. Lady Sybil and Lady Andra had been very worried, yet it was Lady Mormont who insisted on leaving the young girl to her own peace. Hours spent in the Godswood on her own, Birina calmly at her side. The only company she accepted for long periods was Harrod. 2 weeks passed before Arya opened up to the large shepherd. I was scared. Harrod looked up from the leather stitching in his lap. That makes sense. I attacked those men. I killed them. You and Birina together. Harrod elaborated. Does that make it right? Arya wondered. Harrod fixed another thread, it makes it just. Father once told me that a good person can kill but only a monster enjoys it. Lord Stark told you that? Harrod asked skeptically. Arya smirked. Well, he told Robb and Jon. The Godswood was quiet. When it was done, I felt excited. I felt strong. Arya muttered. The shepherd looked over to the young girl, who tucked her knees close. Birina is a direwolf, a strong creature. She is vicious and it serves her well. Men can be just as wild, there's no shame in skin changing. Harrod smiled at Birina, who was curled up in the leaves. My grandfather taught me that when you bond with an animal, you take some of them into you and leave some of yourself in them. Arya kind of liked that idea. She and Birina shared something more than just a girl and a dog. Can you help me get better, she pleaded. Harrod held up the cloak in his lap. It was a wolf pelt fixed with a bronze clasp, quite small, not big enough for himself. He stood up, then kneeled before Arya. The pelt was thrown over her shoulders as he affixed it. I would be honored to. He promised. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Little Arya, it's time for dinner. Harrod called out. Coming, Harrod. Arya responded. She ran into the wood hall situated at the center of the small village. Bear Island was a different place from the mainland. It was small, confined, isolated. Arya was going to celebrate her 2-year anniversary at Deepwood soon. It was ironic since over the last year she'd spent most of her weeks on Bear Island with Harrod and the other shepherds. It turned out a whole village of shepherds had existed on Bear Islands for centuries, built on the most western part of the isle. Harrod had taught her the history of their community over dinners under the stars. Bear Island has always served as a remote place where the shepherds store valuable items and can send the sick to rest. In the truly ancient days, when House Woodfoot ruled, Bear Island was where the more violent shepherds, the ones who served as warriors, would gather to duel and gain renown. Harrod had even shown her the stone circles still standing on the hills overlooking the seas. They had abandoned it when the Ironborn came to conquer and their descendants fought the drowned men constantly. Harrod said the first Lord Mormont was supposedly a shepherd's son who fought with King Roderick Stark and earned the seat. He immediately resettled it with his own folk and new shepherds. Since then it has been an important symbol for the vitality of the North. Did you see Ian or Iud? Harrod asked Arya while she filled her plate. Arya shook her head. I saw their tracks by the river this afternoon. Harrod lived up to his persona in many ways. He was a powerful warg and bonded to 2 juvenile bears. The other shepherds joked when he'd found them abandoned as cubs he'd fed them milk from his teats. That had forced Lady Mage into a very awkward conversation with Arya about the bears and bees. Ian was the bigger of the two, hence his name Parent, and Iud as the smaller of the two was called Child. Arya thought Harrod wasn't very good at naming. It was a good thing Alysanne was in charge of their children, or else they might have ended up as son and daughter. I could have Varys and Aera go looking for them. Arya offered. 2 wolves of Birina's pack had become closely attached to the direwolf. They were so tight-knit that Arya started to unconsciously connect with them while in Birina's mind. Harrod said it was a great opportunity to take a new animal without relying on the special connection she'd shared with Birina. Varys was a rusty red while Aera had a shinier bronze-colored coat. It made sense then, to call them Rust and Bronze, especially since they sounded more impressive in the old tongue. Arya and Harrod drawled on for the rest of the night, flopping between Andal and Old Tongue with ease. Other shepherds joined in. Most of them were quite old, so Arya had learned to see most like Old Nan. She suspected that the only reason Harrod had stuck around was because of Alysanne and the kids. Daisy hadn't been kidding about them. although Arya had on a few occasions seen Alisan just as eager to see Harrod. The next day she made sure to finish her chores early. Lady Ondra was picking her up for a trip back to Deepwood. After the wolves halfway cleaned, she set off with some of the Mormont guards for the docks. The fishing boats drifted into sight when Ondra came galloping up the path, red in the face and out of breath. "Lady Arya, come quickly." Without a word, Arya was scooped up into the saddle, flying back to the water. "Ondra, what's going on?" "Sybil has gone into labor. We have to get back." "Labor?" Arya shouted. "She's having the baby." Ondra was too focused on the reins to answer. Lady Mage was waiting on board. She ordered the sails up the moment Arya and Ondra touched the deck. The small vessel shot across the open water faster than a fish. Mage wouldn't let the captain get a word in about reefs and grounding. They made anchor and were inside the car.